Then in our second event, we broadened our scope to think about how all kinds of religious communities draw on language as a resource aimed at specific goals. And we also thought a bit about how different methodologies reveal different aspects of the aims and processes and outcomes of religious language learning and use. We also asked questions like what distinguishes a religious language from a mundane one, and how to define religious language, and maybe some of the ethical challenges of researching religious language and language learning. And today, as we wrap up this series, I think we're going even broader and asking, what do we know about how and why people teach and learn religious languages, and what do we do with that knowledge? Across this series, we've been really interested in bringing together different perspectives on religious language learning, and we'll continue that today. We'll hear from anthropologists, from education researchers, from educators, from historians, all kinds of different lenses. And we'll continue to think about the role of religious language and language learning in people's lives, what the learning of religious language might reveal about maybe language and literacy in general, and what we can do with our sort of expanding understanding of religious languages and language learning. So just a quick outline of the program for today. So first we'll hear from 5 of our speakers. I'll pose a couple of questions. We'll open it up for questions from whoever might have one for some discussion. And then we'll have a break, about 25 minutes, half an hour. And then in the second half, we'll hear from our remaining speakers, and the same thing, I'll pose some questions, we'll have a discussion. So that's the plan for today. So first up, we have Dr Posegay, a Lieberhume Fellow here at Cambridge, with his talk, By Divination, by Tradition, or by Means of Much Toil, How Tech Transcends Sect in Medieval Language Transmission. So do you want to come up from here?
You want to stand?
No, you can sit. It's totally up to you. I mean, so that should work like that. Okay. Yep.
Just a minute. I'm going to remove my
Sure.
Yeah. Sorry.
Okay.
Right. Well, first I just want to say thank you to Dr. Bader and Dr. Myers and Dr. Hein for inviting me today. I'm, like she said, my name is Dr. Posegay, and I'm from the Faculty of Asian and Middle Eastern Studies. So this is not my home turf. And today I want to introduce you to someone who has been dead for almost 1,000 years now, but who I think would understand some of the issues that we're going to be talking about today about religious learning, religious language education. And that someone is Elias of Nisibis, who was a bishop in the Syriac Church of the East and lived in northern Iraq about 1,000 years ago. And he was very passionate about the Syriac language as the language of his community's biblical text. So in the early 11th century, he also had a problem. And his problem was that Syriac was now losing out to Arabic. So Arabic had the backing of the local Islamic government, and many Syriac Christians now grew up as bilingual Syriac Arabic speakers. Elias was one of them. He spoke Arabic and Syriac, and he wrote books in both that we still have. But worse from his perspective was that some Christians now only spoke Arabic, and they were only exposed to Syriac when they went to church from priests. So one of his fears in this context was that people might lose the knowledge of how to properly recite the Hebrew Bible and understand, or not the Hebrew Bible, the Syriac Bible, and understand the Syriac Bible. So he wrote a book called the Torah Tzmama Soryoyo, the Correction of Syriac Speech, which is a grammar of classical Arabic to teach his followers the proper way to read. And in that book, he says this: but the Hebrews, Syrians, Persians, Cushites, Elamites, Medes, Phoenicians, Alans, and Arabs, as well as others unknown to us, do not have enough letters to express the sounds that they write in their languages, or to read them correctly just as they are. Accordingly, they are forced to place dots on the letters to distinguish the vowels and words from each other, and they are only able to read correctly by an act of divination, by tradition, or by means of much toil. So he's identifying a problem that anyone who knows Syriac or Hebrew or Arabic is familiar with. Each of those languages, of course, is written without, or is written with an alphabet that does not have enough letters to represent all of its vowel sounds. So without enough letters, how do you make sure that the next generation of speakers, the next generation of learners, can recite the holy text exactly the way that previous generations did? So he gives these three options. First is by divination, which is not really a solution. When he's saying this, it's a rhetorical point about how difficult it can be to read unpointed Syriac. Basically, if you don't already know the text very well, you're better off just casting lots and hoping for good fortune, which is not really a sustainable pedagogical model. So the first alternative for him is tradition, by which he mostly means oral transmission. So if you know how to recite the scripture, you can tell someone else how to do it and correct them when they make mistakes. So this is effective, again, if you're very familiar with the text. For instance, many of you will have no trouble reading these perfectly, even without vowels, because you've heard them repeated many times. You're familiar with a specific recitation tradition. So tradition, though, requires that someone somewhere is available to teach new learners. So what if there are no teachers left, right? So while Elias was writing his Syriac grammar, that exact scenario was playing out among Jewish Bible teachers, because we're stuck. So the most prestigious form of Hebrew recitation in the 11th century was the one taught at the Palestinian yeshiva in Tiberias, which is on the Sea of Galilee. And a Jewish scholar called Abul Faraj wrote a book about this Tiberian reading tradition from Tiberias. It's called The Guide for the Reader. And in it, he says this: the people in the communities of the exile would press any teacher who traveled from Tiberias to the distant lands to teach their children the reading of the land of Israel, and eagerly imbibe that from him, making him sit down so that they could assiduously learn from him. This is not my translation. This is my teacher's record, but assiduously is nice. So this report tells us that Jewish communities outside of Palestine knew, they were aware that their Hebrew reading tradition differed from the one in Tiberias, but they didn't have anyone to teach them, even if they wanted to. So unless somebody passed through the town from Tiberias, they had no chance. We also know that there were not enough teachers to go around at all, because within 100 years of this book being written, no one in the world could recite Hebrew like the old Tiberian masters. The tradition had died out. So how do you make sure that your tradition will still be accurate if all the knowledgeable teachers are gone? And it's difficult because people make mistakes in transmission, even if they know something very well, especially when their spoken language diverges from the language of the original scripture. So as Syriac evolved over time, for example, with Elias, it diverged from classical Syriac. So this is where the much toil comes in, because this includes the difficult work of creating systems to fortify a textual tradition against the natural forces of linguistic change. And Elias is building on scribal innovations that began centuries before him even, because of course the one way to do this, to record all the details of your tradition, is to start writing down the vowels. Before the 7th century, this had never been done for Syriac or Arabic or Hebrew. But the question is, why hadn't this been done? Because if you have sounds that aren't in your language, just invent some new letters, right? That's pretty simple. It's actually not simple. The problem was adding letters for every vowel would radically amend the appearance of the Bible and the Quran. And not to mention, it would make the text a lot longer, which is a problem when you have a limited supply of parchment. So that's not to say nobody tried. Jacob of Edessa, who was another Syriac bishop, invented new letters to represent the vowels of classical Syriac. And Jacob is one of the greatest, perhaps the greatest Syriac grammarian, so he probably had the best shot at making this work. But he was also cautious, so he invented these letters based on Greek forms. And here we're going to see a trend emerge. He specified that his new letters were only for teaching the proper forms of Syriac grammar and not for use in all written Syriac. So you might think that that would be difficult to enforce, but fortunately for him, the letters were wildly unpopular and nobody ever used them. So by about 700, Syriac scribes and Hebrew and Arabic scribes still had this problem. The solution was to invent a new scribal technology. It's a system of diacritic dots that represented sounds based on their position relative to the holy text, so above, below, whatever. And Syriac scribes created the first prototype of this new technology back around the 5th century. You can see George Perez's book on this. So they began with 2 dots, and one of them would go above a word to indicate that that word had somewhere in it a vowel pronounced near the back of the mouth, usually aw, ah, ah, oh. Then the other dot went below a word to say that it had a vowel somewhere in it pronounced near the front of the mouth, usually oo, a, e, in contrast to the first dot. And over time, this system evolved and Syriac scribes started adding new dots so that every unique vowel, every discrete vowel in Syriac had its own sign. So around the 8th century, it looks like this. You got 2 dots above for aw, 2 below for a, 1 above and 1 below for ah. You got them. So in the late 8th century, after this was done, another grammarian called David Barpaulos wrote a letter to his friend. It's this letter, in which he attributes the invention of the dots to his own great-great-grandfather, Sabroy. So like take what he has to say with a grain of salt because it's about his own family. But he says that Sabroy and Sabroy's sons came across a group of Ninevites who could not read the Syriac of the Bible. So they invented new vowel points to a system. And the result was, they make it seem like it was miraculous. Sabroy Beverbaum, that's the guy. He says, whenever a book that is corrected by them, so vocalized by them, is opened, it is as if they are speaking along with the one who recites, and they are telling him just how it is recited. So for this purpose, the steadfast ones, so Sabroy and his sons, devoted themselves to making punctuation dots, as well as the dots which are suitable for learners. And these dots which are suitable for learners are the vowel dots. And this is the trend we see again. The intent was only to give new readers the tools they needed to recite Syriac while they were learning the tradition. It was a scribal technology that could enhance the teaching of the time, but not supplant it. But there's also a twist to David's story because you see, David and Sabroy were West Syriac Christians. So part of the Miaphysite sect famously at odds with the Diaphysite East Syriac Christians. But already in the 8th century, East Syrians were using a system of vowels exactly like the one that supposedly Sabroy invented. So they used it so much that that system is now known as the East Syriac vocalization system. So this suggests that East Syrians found the technology so useful that they adopted it and they didn't really care who invented it. There is even one more twist. And so we remember that, that prototype Syriac dot system that we had, this one, with the dot above for vowels in the back of the mouth and dot below for vowels in the front. It wasn't just Syriac scribes who adapted this system into a complete vocalization system, because during the late 7th or early 8th century, Arabic scribes did the same thing to vocalize the text of the Quran. And the process was actually simpler for them because they only needed to represent the 3 main Arabic vowels. That's a, e, u. So they said, take this dot above in Syriac, and now this is just a. And then the dot below will just be e. And then there's no need for signs with multiple dots. We only have one more vowel. So they put 1 dot in the middle, not above or below, right on the line, it would be u. So then we have 3 words here. At the top is Allah, at the bottom Allahi, and in the middle Muhammad. So this was the first system ever used to vocalize the Quran, and it remained in use until about the 11th century. How did Muslims end up with a system based on Syriac scribal practices? Well, if we remember Jacob of Edessa, the bishop who tried to invent new letters for Syriac, he wrote a lot of rulings on questions about what good Christians are supposed to do. And one of those questions was, somewhere around the end of the 7th century, is it permissible for a Syriac priest to teach writing to the children of Muslims? And Jacob said, yes, this is not a problem. So we have to wonder, what language would a 7th century Syriac priest be teaching to Muslim children? We know it was not Syriac, so Greek is a possibility. We know that Syriac scribes and scholars were very influential in translating Greek texts into Arabic. The other option is that they were teaching Arabic writing, which is a skill that some Syriac Christians would have had because they needed to have it to keep their jobs in the Islamic bureaucracy. So when I say that Arabic scribes adapted the Syriac prototype system for the Quran, it's completely possible that those Arabic scribes were also Syriac scribes. They could have been Christians hired by Muslims as scribes, or they could even have been converts to Islam. And in the 7th century, plenty of Muslims were converts. So this is one possible way that this technology could have made it into the Quranic tradition. So initially, there was some resistance to adding these dots to the Quran. And in the 11th century, we have a scholar called Abu Amr ad-Dani, who records several reports of earlier authorities about how it is not permissible to add the vowel dots to the Quran. But he also gives this one report that says, Malik said, but as for the little codices which children learn from, as well as their tablets, these are wax tablets like iPads, I do not think that pointing them is so bad. So again, we see that there is some lenience towards scribal innovation, specifically when it helps new learners, not to vocalize everything that's ever been written, but to help people learn to read the tradition. So there's still a tension though. We have the tension between changing the tradition and using every tool available to make sure that the tradition does not change. We even see the same tension in Hebrew Bibles today. You can put vowel points in a codex that someone can read at home, that's not a problem, but you cannot use a vocalized Torah scroll to recite in a synagogue. So thinking back to Elias of Nisibis now, his concern with preserving his holy language was one that he shared with his Jewish and Muslim contemporaries. And even in the 11th century, he was aware that people of other nations and faiths had adopted and adapted this technology of vowel pointing to better suit their own traditions. So the utility of the new scribal technologies could, and as we have seen, there's a quote, it did cross religious boundaries despite sectarian differences. So thank you for that. Oh, wait. Sorry, I wrote a book about this. It's pretty good. You can download it for free from Open Book Publishers, and yeah, okay, thank you, that's it.
Okay.
So do you want questions now?
I think what we'll do is do all questions at the end, so maybe make note of your questions, and I see that some also maybe popped up in our chat. So I'll save those.
Quick thing, we can't, at least Tanti and I cannot see the slides advancing, and that probably means the video recording also does not, so I think you want to get that fixed before we continue, for the sake at least of the recording.
Okay.
Can people
Yeah, I couldn't see, I couldn't see the slides advancing.
Okay. Iona, are you there?
I am.
Do you know why the slides might not be visible to advance on?
I think we're seeing them from the wrong screen. So I'm guessing we're seeing your laptop screen rather than the
Yeah.
big screen.
I
So
think
you
you're
need
right.
to come out of screen sharing and then choose the options again to make sure you're sharing the correct screen.
Okay.
Well, sorry about that. I mean, were people able to see any of the slides? No, well, that's unfortunate. I'm very sorry.
Yeah. Maybe what we can do, oh, and now the camera's doing something strange.
Is that my camera? Yeah, sorry, my
Yeah, that was
camera's
you, Iona. Yeah, it's good now.
got issues.
Okay, let's see. Maybe, so Sharon, you are next. Do you want to share yours and see if we can like see them?
Sure, absolutely. So, does this look okay? Can wait, I can actually see if does that look okay?
Yep,
Yep,
Yes.
it works.
It's moving on this end as well now.
Oh, good. Okay.
Okay, perfect. So
I would
yeah,
love, if Anastasia, if we could get a copy of those slides though, that would be great, because I would love to read them and see that.
yeah, Nick, is that okay if we share your slides with the people who are online? Okay, we'll check about that.
Okay, and if you don't want to share the slides, you could also actually make a video, a voiceover video, if you wanted to have that complemented as a link on the website. Again, just so that your work is available as intended.
Okay. Okay, maybe that's the better way to do it. Okay, so
Or I'll just read the book, which I might actually. I love the
Oh, I'm getting the book. Oh yeah.
I love the reviews about the obsessive number of puns. I love that. That kind
So
of
actually, if the link, since we couldn't see the website, the link on the website, if that could be sent out, that would be great.
There was
Thank
one
you.
if you just search open book publishers, it'll be on there.
Okay, great. Thank you.
we'll share the title as well, so you can search it on there. Because I think that was just in the slide. Okay, perfect. I think now we've sorted the technology, hopefully. And next up we have Sharon Avni. She's a professor of academic literacy and linguistics at CUNY in New York, with her talk, Multilingualism at Play, Hebrew at American Jewish Summer Camp.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. And thank you so much for having me. I'm sorry that I'm not able to be at Cambridge now. I'm coming to you from my basement in New Jersey. And I am talking to you. I think I have about 10 or 12 minutes, correct? About some research I did with two other scholars a few years ago. And I thought that this might be interesting to present because I think it raises some broader questions. Most people actually don't know about what I'm about to speak about because it's a very American Jewish thing in some ways. But I think that it raises, what I'm going to try to do in this presentation, in this quick presentation, is raise some broader issues, which I do hope speaks to some of the work that you are all engaged in. So just very, very quickly. So American Jews, and of course, anytime you talk about a group, I don't mean to say everyone, and I'm acknowledging the diversity and all that, but I would say that it is not an uncommon thing for American Jewish families in the summer to send their children to overnight Jewish camps. This started it was a post-World War I phenomenon where they wanted to get Jewish kids out of the urban centers and cut them off and away from their families and their immediate settings so that they could do some Jewish education. And so these camps started sprouting up around that time. And then there was exponential growth in the 40s and 50s. And today, there are probably over 200 camps, and these are across the ideological and religious spectrum. So all the way from very ultra-Orthodox camps to camps that, refer to themselves even as Jewish Light, L-I-T-E, unaffiliated with any of the denominations in American Judaism. And so there's Yiddish camps. I mean, so there's a broad array of these camps. And this number is probably actually a little low, that I wrote 200,000 campers. I think that actually in the past, since COVID, actually that number has gone up. But I just want to say that in general, the birth of these camps was really a matter, at the time, American Jews were really thinking about integration. How do they become part? There's a famous historian who said, how do they become a part, a space part, and a part, A-P-A-R-T, of American society? And so really integration was the leading, let's say, concern during the early periods of these camps. And I just have this, this one quote that even from the early days, this is from one of the first camps that was started, Hebrew language must be a necessity, be the keystone for the entire camp program, and the center around which all cultural, educational, recreational, programmatic efforts must evolve. If there's any hope of the American Jewish community preserving its identity as an ethnic sub-community, again, integration, it must be through transmitting to the younger generation, or at least the very least to a select portion of it, the key to the Jewish treasure house furnished by the Hebrew language. So, and you know, it's important to note the date here. This is 1941, so this is even pre the establishment of the state of Israel. And so this is sort of American Jews were kind of at the forefront of thinking about bringing Hebrew into their we could call it experiential. This is not wording they used, or informal Jewish setting, educational settings at their time. Okay, so another camp, I just want to give a little bit of the historical stuff because I think it helps to think about what I'll show you in the more modern contemporary stuff. So this is a camp that in 1959, they had, this is in our in the archives, we found that these were some of the Hebrew words that were very commonly used in 1959. So I put a translation after, and if you see all of these, I didn't know how to translate mezuzah. I hope that's the thing that people put on their doors to indicate that it's a Jewish home. I'm not really sure how to translate that, but in any event, you can see that all of the words in 1959 were very much connected to more what we might consider religious practices, lighting Shabbat candles, prayer, that kind of stuff. And already in 1964, so only 5 years later, we see an introduction of very different kind of words like boker, machane. These are words that are about things that the camp is doing. So there was a shift toward using more vernacular Hebrew, even very quickly, you know, in the 50s and 60s. But I just think is interesting because this actually comes into play in what's going on in camps today. So, okay, so just also some background. I feel like I have to give so much background, I'm going to leave myself exactly 2 minutes to talk about what's going on today. But so American Jews, by and large, do not know modern Hebrew. When I say modern Hebrew, I mean the Hebrew that is spoken in Israel as its vernacular. Sometimes that's referred to as Israeli Hebrew, but we'll call it modern Hebrew. So by and large, American Jews do not know this language. They don't understand it. They can't speak it. They can't necessarily read, and they definitely cannot write it. And probably if you've heard Anastasia's stuff at work, her wonderful scholarship, similar to European Jews, American Jews learn how to decode Hebrew. So to read the letters with very little comprehension of what they are actually reading. And according to the Pew survey, now there's been more recent ones since 2013, but I put this one, the more recent one done in 2020 did not have any language questions, unfortunately, but in the 2013 one, according to their reporting, 52% of American Jews reported knowing the Hebrew alphabet, at least decoding, whereas 13 reported they could understand most of all the words they read in Hebrew. You know, I'm a little suspicious of even those figures, but that's the state of Hebrew among American Jews, again, as a very broadly defined community. Okay, so in our research that we did, just to speak very quickly, we went to about 35 camps over the course of 3 summers, and some camps we spent a few days, others we spent weeks. We did a lot of archival work, lots of focus groups, interviews, spoke with campers, staff, directors, parents. This was a very large project. And we came up with this notion of Hebrew infusion. And by Hebrew infusion, we meant that it's a set of practices, written and spoken, in which varieties of Hebrew are integrated into everyday camp experiences through songs, blessings, signage, camps, routinized interactions. And in general, Hebrew infusion, this use of Hebrew in American Jewish summer camps today, it's not really oriented toward any kind of fluency or competence in Hebrew or in any kinds of Hebrew, modern or otherwise. That's not the goal. So people are not sending their, camps are not using Hebrew in order to, for campers or others to come out being speakers of Hebrew or competent users of the language. And we identified what we called this variety of Hebrew, which we called Camp Hebraized English. And it's a variety that uses different types of Hebrew. So, you know, obviously Hebrew is a very, very old language and it has evolved over time. I won't go into that, but we can talk about 4 kinds of Hebrew, biblical, Mishnaic, medieval, and then what we might call modern and or Israeli Hebrew. So the kind that we were seeing at camp were these Jewish life words, which are things like shalom, Shabbat, when you light candles, words like that. So these are these Jewish life words, which are very integrated into American English. I mean, even if you're perhaps not Jewish, you might know these words just because they're part of a broader vernacular. There are modern Hebrew words, so that's the Hebrew spoken in Israel. There's textual Hebrew, so prayers and liturgy. And then I think the most interesting one, at least from my vantage point, were these camp words and camp jargon. And I use jargon kind of knowing that as a sociolinguist, that's a really problematic word, but I use it on purpose because camps were creating their own forms of Hebrew. And the amount of pushback that others have toward this form of Hebrew is really interesting. You know, many consider it an inauthentic, illegitimate, inferior form of Hebrew. And so you imagine at each camp, they are creating their own kinds of Hebrew. So just to give you a very quick snapshot of of things of how Hebrew would present itself or manifest itself at camp. This is a map of a camp, you know, of its layout on the left. And you see, these are the different buildings in case it's not clear what this is a map of. This is the different buildings. And you see that there's something called the Vineyard and next to it, and then there's something called Reuben's house, but then next to it are all these places that they identify by Hebrew words. They have Mirpa'ah and Harochel. I'll get back to this in a second, this particular one, but you can see that this is this would be the common map at the camp. Here's a schedule that was put up. I love this little picture of these women. I mean, it's camp, it's fun. You know, this is not school, but I love this little picture of these women on this schedule. It just makes no sense. But you can see that there's an integration of Hebrew is being infused here in this daily schedule, and nobody would think twice about this kind of, you know, you start with Boker Tov, which would be like, that's good morning in Hebrew, and that's like morning ceremony, right? And then at 10 o'clock, it's big block, which I don't actually know what that is specifically at this camp, but this is integration. There's this real mix of different codes going on. So just to speak about some of the creativity, about some of the Hebrew that camps on their own are creating, because, you know, in any environment, especially one, I think it's Goffman who says, what is his word about total institutions, right? These are total institutions. And so obviously they're creating their own language. They take a word like, they take the word yom, which is day, and teva, which is nature, and omanut, which is art. So these 3 words, and they create a word called Yom Teva Nut. So in this particular camp, that's nature and art day. I'll just do one more of these. If we look at the 3rd one, they took the word mo'adon. A mo'adon is like a lodge, like a clubhouse kind of thing. And they took tzevet, which is staff, and they created this word motzev, which is the place where staff can go and hang out during the day. Now, you know, these are words that these roll off the tongue of the people at these particular camps. They don't think twice about it. And what's interesting in our research is that we found that sometimes campers don't actually know that these are Hebrew, or they don't actually know that these aren't Hebrew spoken in Israel, which is always sort of an interesting. I'll just because I'm a linguist, I want to show if there are any linguists out there, there's some really interesting linguistic stuff going on also in terms of clipping and back formations and conversions and stuff like that. So the correct, or the word used to talk about a place of eating would be a chadochel, but because that is a particular phonology that might be a little more difficult for Americans to say, the ch becomes ha, right? And it becomes hotter, right? And so there's these changes of Birkat Hamazon, a blessing you say over meals, becomes just Birkat. There's all this kind of changing, and you saw on the map previously the word Mirpa'ah, which is an infirmary, a clinic, gets shortened to all these kinds of things. So lots of really interesting linguistic work is being done, and so you have sentences like this. After Birkat, meet in front of the Hadar for Pulat Erev. Or, a kid said to me, I was late for Omanut because I had to get something at the Mirp, right? So these are the way that these campers are speaking. And this does not exist outside of camp settings. To say that this kind of use of Hebrew, we don't see this in synagogues or in other kinds of settings for the most part. So I'll just end with this because there are speakers of Hebrew who work or attend these camps, and they're in a bit, this is a whole chapter in our book, but this is a bit of what happens when a community takes on a language that is not their own and changes it in ways that that others find threatening or challenging. And so for Israelis who come to these settings, they're very confused, and they say, but this isn't Hebrew. This is not Hebrew. This, this would not work in Israel. We don't know what you're talking about, in fact. And, they say things like some parts of it lose all trace of actual Hebrew. So these kinds of comments, these evaluative kind of comments, I will say what's interesting, I'd love to go into it more, but what's interesting is that by the Hebrew speakers and users, the Israelis and otherwise, who come to camp and are sort of perplexed by this, within a week at sleepaway camp is like 4 years in real life. It's like dog years. A week at camp is like, a long time because you're together so much. Within a week, I would say within 2 or 3 days, even, we found that most Israelis are using the camp Hebrew. And they just, realize that this is the language of the space. They adopt the localized code. So there's lots to say, I could go on and on, but I just, some final thoughts, so what our study really is trying to address is what does it mean for a community to feel attached to a language that they don't widely know or use? And that leads to really interesting stuff. What does it mean for a diasporic? And again, in quotes, because I'm not sure that many of these communities feel that they are a diasporic community. But what does it mean to make use of a homeland or a center language? And what are the challenges of language localization, meaning taking on a language that is not your own and changing it and adopting it for your own needs? Where others are pushing back against that. And in the book we go into a lot about how this destabilizes both the native speakers' use of the language, but also offers these spaces that where American Jewry is right now, in terms of it's not about integration, where in general, American Jews are less worried about integration and more worried about other things today. But the camp spaces are a place in which discourses of authenticity and inauthenticity are able to be articulated. So with that, I thank you very much, and I welcome any questions you might have.
Thank you so much. Wonderful. So yeah, we'll hold questions to the end. And next up is actually me. So I'm Anastasia. I'm a research associate and an anthropologist here at Cambridge in the Cambridge Interfaith program. And so what I've been sharing in these workshops has really focused on the Luxembourgish liberal Jewish community. But today I want to share something a little bit new that's based on some really preliminary field work with the Orthodox Jewish community in Luxembourg. And so it'll be something a little bit different from what I've shared previously. And I think the biggest questions at the heart of what I'll discuss today are really what makes a religious language? How can we define religious language? And how do we account for language learning across contexts, both religious and secular? So I'll just start with a little bit of background. So the Jewish population of Luxembourg has historically been pretty averse to change. While Haskalah and the reforms of the 19th century were really popular in Germany and other parts of Central and Western Europe, Jews in Luxembourg were less certain about their appeal. In fact, when Samuel Hirsch, a noted champion of reform, was appointed the first Grand Rabbi of Luxembourg in 1843, the community was not so excited about it and actually eventually rejected Hirsch. Decades later, as this community rebuilt post-war and ultimately managed to reestablish 2 active synagogues, it still remained pretty uniform in character. So the Luxembourgish Jewish community was culturally and nationally Luxembourgish, mostly Ashkenazi, Orthodox, trilingual, speaking Luxembourgish, German, and French, but definitely favoring Luxembourgish. So despite Luxembourg's high levels of migration and multilingualism and the really powerfully influential Catholic Church, the Jewish community and their pretty homogeneous population persisted for a really long time. But in the last maybe 15 years or so, a lot has changed really quickly. So of the 2 synagogue congregations in Luxembourg, one is now liberal. As numbers of expats and all kinds of people moving to Luxembourg for work has boomed, so too have numbers of Jewish expats who've arrived in Luxembourg with their own practices, their own languages, their own modes of observance, their own religious needs. Other changes include a Chabad family settling in Luxembourg City, and their activities have become a really strong draw for expats especially, and for local young families. Also in this period, the Luxembourgish government has decided it is time to secularize, declaring religion to be a private matter, doing away with things like Catholic catechism classes in public schools, but also changing and really downsizing the old funding scheme that they used to give to recognize religious communities, including the Jewish community. So in the remaining Orthodox synagogues specifically, which I'll call the CIL, these changes have been really disruptive. They've evoked internal tensions, concerns about the future, and a scramble to kind of react meaningfully and constructively. And they were also facing their own kind of internal turmoil. So a huge number of French Sephardim started moving to Luxembourg for work, and most of them joined the CIL synagogue, leading to a really significant rift with existing traditionally Ashkenazi community members. There have been all kinds of disagreements that have stemmed from this. So disagreements about appropriate liturgies, prosody, food, histories, levels of observance, and more. The 2 most recent rabbis and other key powerful voices in this congregation have been French Sephardi, and have really insisted on modern Hebrew pronunciations and all kinds of new styles that they've brought with them, while the old Luxembourgish families found it really kind of upsetting. They find a lot of the new sounds to be, quote, generic compared to their traditional and moving styles. While newer Sephardi members disagree, they find the Ashkenazi prosodic styles and odd pronunciations to be depressing, sad, and boring, and not something that you want to deal with during important times like the high holidays. And in fact, this debate reached such a pitch that it was eventually decided that for the high holidays, there would be 2 separate services. So they hold one Sephardi style and one Ashkenazi style at the same time, in separate parts of the synagogue building, and the rabbi kind of goes between them. So outside of clashes around the specifics of practice and prosody and pronunciation, there's all kind of other issues. So key members of the CIL's lay leadership are also Sephardi, but a lot of the board that manages the synagogue's funds are dominated by old families, old Luxembourgish Ashkenazi families. There's debates about Holocaust memorialization. Some people feel enough is enough. We do so much in terms of Holocaust memorial events. There are other histories and narratives that warrant attention, while some feel that the Luxembourgish state's slow and sort of tepid response to calls for memorialization means we have to keep pushing. And through all of this, everybody is worried that the congregation's membership numbers are down, and that a lot of families seem to be spending more time at Chabad's events. And much to their frustration, the numbers of the liberal congregation appear to be growing. So there's all of this kind of turmoil and nervousness and concern about the future. And yet, in the face of all of these challenges, the congregation continues to try to seek ways to make things in common, to cultivate a sense of sharedness and what some members call a community feel. And one of the most powerful and I think meaningfully felt of these efforts revolves around language. There's a real emphasis on French, and especially on very good and very precise French, as the language of this community. As the current rabbi once told me, in order to be integrated into this community, you have to speak French. And this is especially interesting if we consider that in Luxembourg, French has historically been a language of prestige. It's also an official language today. On the other hand, though, a lot of Luxembourgers, especially those who go through the state school system, they report feeling a little less comfortable in French than the other official languages of German and Luxembourgish. This may be because in that school system, you first learn to read in German, and then a combination of German and Luxembourgish is used for instruction. So not until a bit later do you really start studying French and using French in school. And also a lot of teachers say they themselves don't feel super confident in French, so that kind of, trickles into the classroom. So all this means that a lot of congregants in the CIL who grew up in the country, who come from Luxembourgish families, they maybe don't feel super comfortable in French and would actually prefer Luxembourgish or German in their sort of everyday communications. But that said, of course, French is sort of circulating in Luxembourg. People do use it in day-to-day interaction. It's not like only reserved for state business. It's present, but it's not a lot of people's preferred language. The other interesting thing about this community emphasizing French as their community language is that this French doesn't really seem to be distinct from the French that everybody else is speaking. Certainly not in the same ways that maybe medieval Judeo-French was, or some studies show that contemporary Jewish French in Israel might be today. But nonetheless, really precise French, just like really precise and accurate and proficient Hebrew, are taken to be something that distinguish the CIL community from local non-Jews and from the liberal Jewish congregation in Luxembourg. So, for example, there's a lot of talk about how non-Jewish students in Luxembourgish schools don't learn French, as well as kids in the CIL's Talmud Torah. So CIL students will therefore be more prepared for future study, like in high school, when more courses are likely to take place in French, or at university. There's also a lot of talk about how this emphasis on French, especially very precise, proper French, is different from the liberal Jewish community, which emphasizes multilingualism and linguistic flexibility. So for CIL members, they feel that that kind of haphazard multilingualism can't create coherence or a community feel, and also is indicative of a haphazard approach to religious observance. So they're linking sort of French and observance in this way. CIL leadership often reiterates the idea that to be Jewish, you want to live in society, but not be like the others. So differentiation is really critical, and French is part of how they see themselves being differentiated, even though most Luxembourgers are also speaking French. But it's this emphasis on really precise and proper French. And we see this really strongly, especially in the CIL's Talmud Torah school, where French is both the language of instruction, but also very often a focus of instruction alongside Hebrew. So as I said, a lot of the Talmud Torah students, if they're from Luxembourgish families, which many are, they may not have yet spent a lot of time studying French in school, and they might not feel very confident in it. But regardless, as the rabbi told me, teachers in his Talmud Torah, they might speak more slowly, they might repeat themselves, but they do not translate. It was critical, he explained, that classes take place in French and that students learn to master French, in addition to mastering Jewish history, practice, and Hebrew. As the students progress through Talmud Torah and approach B'nai Mitzvah, there's unsurprisingly more and more emphasis on proficient Hebrew reading. Teachers spend a lot of time going over pronunciation, correcting students, walking them through reading different texts. Precision and high levels of skill are pretty expected. And the same practices and attention to a lot of these same details appear in the way Talmud Torah teachers approached and taught French in the classroom. So they spend a lot of time correcting students' French pronunciation, going over the meanings or origins of French words, or connecting different French words, reading French texts aloud and together, and really emphasizing the importance of precision and accuracy for ensuring successful communication and performance and for fitting in and being part of this community. So the ways that they're engaging French are really running parallel to the ways that they're engaging Hebrew. In fact, French was so critical part of the Talmud Torah school that the CIL often invites teachers from France to teach at this school. So these teachers typically come from relatively observant communities in Eastern France, and they're praised as both masters of French and models of Jewish living. So French proficiency and properly observant life are linked again. So French, this language that a lot of Luxembourgish people might not necessarily choose as their first option for communication, it's doing all kinds of interesting things. It's acting as a language that is being linked to sort of unity, to close adherence to religious norms, to a distinction from a more liberal Jewish counterpart. It becomes the language of this Jewish community, contrasted with the perceived lesser French of non-Jewish Luxembourgers. It's not only a kind of sort of community maker, it's also being used and taught and talked about in a lot of ways that, as I said, parallel Hebrew. But unlike Hebrew, French has the added bonus of not having issues or debates over pronunciation system that Hebrew does in this community. So one thing I'm thinking about at the moment is, what can we say about French here? Is it a religious language? Is it a religious-ish language? Is it a Jewish language? Are Jewish languages always religious languages? And if we want to ask about language learning, how do language practices and ideologies that students are learning about French in Talmud Torah intersect or clash with what they're learning about French in their secular day schools? What are students understanding about French and what it's about? And what are they understanding about French in relation to Hebrew? When your Talmud Torah teacher spends just as much time reviewing and correcting your French as she does your Hebrew, what are you to make of this in Talmud Torah? When your teacher is praised in the same breath for her mastery of French and her admirably observant life, what does this tell you about, as a student, about how French and Jewishness fit together? So this is all, like I said, based on some very preliminary field work, which I hope to continue. But I think it opens up some really interesting questions about religious language, about how we define it, and really about processes of religious language learning, which of course never happens in isolation. Students are always learning different languages and learning about language in all kinds of contexts across their lives. So maybe another thing to think about is, how can we account for these multiple sort of complex language learning experiences in our study of religious language? So I'll leave that there for now. This is just something new I'm working on that I thought might be interesting to share today. So thank you. Great. So next we have Professor Leslie Moore, an applied linguist and linguistic anthropologist at Ohio State University, and Dr. Artanti Sari from Universitas PGRI Palembang in Indonesia, with their paper Learning Quranic Arabic in a Virtual Village, Online Sacred Language and Literacy Socialization in Transnational Indonesian Muslim Families.
Thank you. Tanti will be
Anastasia.
sharing this
Yeah.
the slideshow for us.
All right.
And we're going to take turns of talking. Thank you very much for inviting us. We're sorry not to be there in person. This is actually a rough time to travel, I think, for all of us. I'm glad to be together and feel very fortunate that we have the digital tools that allow this kind of conversation and potential collaboration. Tanti and I have been working together since she graduated from OSU, and we have Zoom to thank for that, and email to a great extent, right? So our focus today, we chose to talk about
Okay.
looking at Quranic language and literacy socialization in digital spaces and how families are using online communication technology to get the kids supported by a broader community and accomplish their language socialization and religious education goals. So our core question is, how do Indonesian Muslim families in a Midwest US city leverage online environments to promote children's learning to recite Quranic Arabic? So we're particularly focusing on children's recitation skills, and as a part of the picture, how the fostering of children's connection to their religious and their ethnic communities while living far from the home country. We're examining how families adapted, quote unquote, traditional practices of sacred language and literacy education, and how they developed new practices in digital spaces.
All right. The Muslim population in Indonesia is approximately 87.5% of the total population, or about 240 million people. Communal support for Muslim children, Quranic Arabic literacy development is readily available in Indonesia, where families have access to in-person Quran classes, private lessons, and supportive extended family members. Indonesian Muslims in the US, however, do not have the same access to communal assistance. Their population is very small and dispersed, only about 26,000 people, or around only 20% of the whole Indonesian population in the US, which is also small, only about 129,000 people.
So we come to this study from a language socialization perspective. Like Sharon, we have very similar training, and we're in conversation a long time now already. And what that means is that we study how people are apprenticed into language, through language and into language in the activities, identities, beliefs, and values of a community. And we see our work, by sitting at the intersection of specifically language socialization and multilingualism and biliteracy, religious language socialization, and language socialization in digital spaces. So what it means to do language socialization research is to do ethnographic, longitudinal, and interactional discourse analytic work. This study is focusing on 2 families, comes from a larger body of work with more participants. Data set includes observations, interviews, artifacts. And in addition to the interactional discourse analysis, we used the Strauss and Corbin 3-step coding process.
All right, we come to the findings of our research. So due to the limited access of offline or in-person support, the US-based Indonesian Muslim families leverage offline and online networks. Within the local network, children learn Quranic Arabic literacy at home, Islamic weekend school, and/or Islamic elementary school. Within the translocal network, which spans across the North America, children learn in Quran reading groups held by an Indonesian Muslim organization in North America. Within the transnational network, children's learning were supported by extended family members, such as grandparents and Quran recitation teachers in Indonesia. As it takes a village to raise a child, by leveraging these multiple spaces, the families constructed a virtual village involving co-religionists, co-nationals, and co-ethnics. So Quranic Arabic language and literacy learning trajectory varied among children and families. This table presents a typical learning trajectory of children in our study. Recognition of Arabic alphabet and introduction to short surahs starts as early as the age of 4 or 5. At 6 or 7 years old, children learn to decode short phrases and memorize short surahs, starting with the opening chapter, Al-Fatiha. From that point forward, learning Quranic Arabic literacy is mainly aimed at perfecting recitation. Some of the older children also learn the tafsir or the meaning of the Quran, but not all of the adolescents. So the emphasis on perfect recitation was influenced by two factors. First is the shift in Indonesian Quranic literacy education in the mid-1990s and parents' personal experiences. During the mid-1990s, melodious recitation of the Quran was given more attention. There was a particular emphasis on eliminating or minimizing the influence of other languages on pronunciation of Arabic speech sounds, words, and text. Parents' emphasis on perfecting recitation was also shaped by their own experiences. For example, one of the parents in the study recounted that she had thought that she knew how to recite the Quran correctly until she recited the sacred text aloud in a recitation group, which included native speakers of Arabic who pointed out some of her mistakes. These parents were born in the 60s and 70s, and they did not receive a real intensive course on how to pronounce Arabic sounds correctly. So yeah, this is also my experience actually.
So we're looking at three settings now: one, extended family, online lessons, and friends. And extended family, what we saw that families were taking advantage of digital technologies to involve faraway extended family in their children's religious education and language learning. Without the extended families living nearby, Sarah, one of the vocal kids, their family maintained a weekly online communication with her grandparents. And during these video chats, Sarah would connect with her grandfather, with whom she developed and displayed her competence in Quranic Arabic in various ways through various activities. They had a routine that they developed together of taking turns to recite a surah. And Sarah really enjoyed this routine, and it motivated her to engage in her memorization practice outside of the schooling. The two often also discussed her religious education, and Sarah's grandfather encouraged her in her development of sacred language and literacy skills. So the online lessons is another major activity setting in which children learn to recite sacred texts. It was Quran lessons in online translocal or transnational spaces. With the focal families that we're talking about, both mothers actually sat with their kids during online lessons, and that was with the intent of keeping them focused on learning. So my parents out there who went through the pandemic and digital online schooling, you know what I'm talking about. Now, their co-presence with the child during instruction, this was very much a departure from the usual organization of lesson participation, with the parents would be absent, right? And it meant that mothers were actively involved and often mediated the child's learning during the lesson. Now, both focal children had been taught previously in private online lessons by male teachers in Pakistan. When the two mothers learned about the availability, online availability of English and Bahasa Indonesia speaking female Indonesian teachers living in Indonesia, they switched because they preferred being able to speak Bahasa Indonesia with the teacher, and they preferred interacting with the teacher of the same gender.
Okay. Other important supporters of children Quranic Arabic literacy development were family friends. Their support is shown in the comments section on a mother's Facebook post, as seen here. Okay. Online social media provided an effective and often entertaining means to share new developments in a child's Quranic Arabic knowledge and skills, to which friends could respond with affirmation and/or advice. This text was taped on a bedroom wall containing a handwritten text intended to assist non-Arabic speaking Muslims in memorizing Islamic prayers. The Facebook post was accompanied by a caption that says, "It's not the greatest, but Alhamdulillah, praise God for a 6 years old. It means something to us. Salah, prayer, instruction by Hafiz, that's the name of the child, and he's selling it to us for only $10. LOL, laugh out loud. Anyone wants to have one? Smiley face." So the boy who wrote the text, Hafiz, was asked by his Quran teacher to memorize the words of Islamic prayers. So he copied the transliteration from an Islamic book. He assigned a monetary value to his creation because he saw the value and usefulness of the text. He had observed that religious educational materials had to be bought, unlike what he saw in his secular education. The mother's post was a means to engage the family's virtual village in the experience and expression of thankfulness and humor. Her Facebook friends responded with likes and praise. For example, MashaAllah, good job, and smart boy, showing their support for Hafiz's religious endeavor. So in short, the Facebook post served as a form of engagement in Indonesian Muslim community, presentation of religious effort, expression of thankfulness and humor, and obtaining of support for religious endeavors.
So what we're concluding with is that we see this bidirectional matter of transformation of practice and construction of a virtual village, right? And it's going both ways. Indonesian Muslim families' sacred language learning and literacy in the diaspora involved the transformation of the cultural organization of teaching and learning. So while they sought to replicate what was done usually in Indonesia, parents also adapted to the conditions in North America. In Indonesia, children's religious literacy socialization is supported by a rich variety of local resources found within the community's physical space. Children have ample opportunities to learn to recite sacred texts in nearby mosques, public and private schools, and/or private lessons at home. Additionally, extended family members who live in the same house or nearby residences may contribute to children's religious education. In the US, affordances for religious language and literacy education in physical spaces were very limited and could be very expensive. So if you went to a private Islamic education school, that was quite pricey. Faced with limited opportunities for co-present interactions, Indonesian Muslim parents in the US used information and telecommunication technology to adapt learning and traditions from Indonesia to the diasporic context, creating a virtual village in which they and their children moved across translocal and transnational spaces to avail themselves of familial and community support for children's development of sacred language competence and Indonesian Muslim identity.
Okay, to conclude our presentation, we would like to point out the following. Internet technology has enabled the US Indonesian Muslim community to establish a virtual village to support children's learning of Quranic Arabic literacy. In the virtual village, cultural practices for supporting children's learning are being transformed through adaptation and innovation. Further research on the use of internet technology in other religious settings or communities will enrich our knowledge about sacred language and literacy practices in the contemporary context of online digital spaces. And that concludes our presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Leslie and Artanti. So our last presenter in this first half will be Dr. Daniel Weiss, and he's a senior lecturer in Jewish studies here at Cambridge, also in the Cambridge Interfaith program. And he'll be talking about, I think, a new project that he's just getting started on. So I think Daniel has some slides, so maybe we can just make sure that they're visible on the, let's see. Oh. This one?
Sure. But we have to share it.
Yeah, so I think if we share.
Go share screen here.
Mhm.
And then Do we do it to the, should we do it to the app? Probably to the app.
That's what I did. and it didn't
Oh, you did it to
work.
the app, so we should just do it to the
To the
desktop.
desktop, maybe, okay.
But then.
Let's test it. Not like that though. Not like that.
Maybe just do this one here.
Yeah. Which is,
Yeah. Oh, still the, oh, you slide.
I
show.
think the first slide is blank. Just go to the
Okay.
next slide.
yeah, right. Is that okay? You can see
Yeah.
it changing? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
Okay.
perfect.
Okay. Great. Thank you, Anastasia, for inviting me. And I'm currently part of a multi-university project entitled God and Human Speech, which is organized by Joanna Leidenhag at the University of Leeds. And for the sub-project that I'm co-leading, I'm working with Napoleon Katsos, who's a professor in experimental linguistics here at the University of Cambridge. And our project involves bringing classical rabbinic modes of scriptural interpretation into dialogue with empirical studies on language processing and acquisition of various linguistic abilities. So scholars have not long noted the distinctive interpretive practices of classical rabbinic midrash in relation to the biblical text. One key element to note is that rabbinic interpretation frequently comes up with readings of scriptural verses that at first glance seem very different from the apparent plain meaning of the scriptural texts. Yet, in most cases, this non-obvious reading does not take the form of an allegorical reading, in which a higher level interpretation is given over and above the starting point of a literal understanding of scripture. So an example of an allegorical reading could be, for instance, reading the narrative of Moses climbing up Mount Sinai as corresponding allegorically to the spiritual ascent of the human soul and seeking God. And so the allegorical reading of the soul's ascent to God builds upon an assumed literal level of Moses climbing up the mountain. By contrast to an allegorical approach, rabbinic interpretation can be understood as offering non-obvious interpretations that nevertheless still operate within the literal plane of the scriptural text. So to illustrate what I mean by a non-obvious yet still literal interpretation, consider the following example from philosopher of language John Searle. If most people hear the sentence, "She gave him her key and he opened the door," now you've all heard it, and so you can think about what image appears in your mind when you hear that. The picture that would most likely come to mind would be, she took out a normal key, gave it to him, and he opened the door by unlocking it. However, the same sentence, "She gave him her key and he opened the door," could in principle also match up with a scenario of, he took out a huge 100-pound key in the shape of an axe, and he picked it up and used it to batter down the door. This interpretation is very different from the typical one, yet it's not allegorical or metaphorical. Both would be two different possible literal understandings of, "She gave him her key and he opened the door." Compared to the first, the second interpretation is not the obvious or apparent one, but it is no less in principle fitting in relation to the words of the sentence. And many instances of rabbinic midrash operate with a similar non-obvious, yet not non-literal dynamic. Some midrashic readings arrive at non-obvious readings by taking advantage of lexical ambiguities or in punctuation or parsing. And actually, some of this may relate to the point that Nick mentioned on the aspect of them understanding the scriptural text that's written without vowel. And we can talk about how that could play into it. Other instances, though, operate in relation to phonological ambiguity on the level of oral pronunciation. And so in the various cases, the rabbinic readers seek out ambiguities, often in creative or seemingly far-fetched ways, in order to come up with new and different readings of a seemingly familiar verse. So let's just look at a couple examples. So this one is drawing on aspects of ambiguity of parsing or phrase division. So the Hebrew of Amos, from the book of Amos, chapter 5, the Hebrew here is usually construed as she has fallen and will no more rise, the Virgin of Israel. So personifying the community of the Israelites as the Virgin of Israel, and this, but saying it's a tragic sounding construal, right? She has fallen and will no more rise. So she's dead and not getting up. However, in the Babylonian Talmud, this verse is midrashically construed as she has fallen and will no more. Rise, O Virgin of Israel. So reversing this permanent sounding downfall and instead declaring hope for renewal or restoration. This construal builds on the lack of punctuation in the Hebrew scriptural text, enabling the rabbinic reader to propose an alternative parsing of the sentence. But again, it remains on the same literal level. So one other example that gets in our mind. So this is in interpretation. There's a missing space there. It's okay. So in this is a description in the book of Exodus of God's revelation to the Israelites at Mount Sinai. And this is taking place, this verse is just before the revelation takes place. And so I've translated it here, but I've left one word actually untranslated because that's the one that is played upon. So it says, and Moses brought forth the people out of the camp to meet God, and they stood betachtit, the mountain. Now this is usually translated as the people stood at the foot of the mountain. However, the Mechilta de Rabbi Ishmael construes betachtit not as at the foot of, but because the word is also has the same root as the term under. So they can construe this as Moses brought forth the people out of the camp to meet God, and they stood under the mountain. They say that God held them, the mountain was uprooted, and God held it over the Israelites like a bride under a wedding canopy, preparing to enter into a covenant with God as the bridegroom. And so this construal is particularly close to the type of non-metaphorical but non-obvious reading that we saw with Searle. Example, she gave him her key and he opened the door. So with these examples in mind, just to give you a flavor of them, and I'll talk about what we're planning to do with them and how to conceive of what's going on in their use of language. Because in the past, these rabbinic interpretations were often viewed, particularly by Christian readers, but also by some Jewish ones, as strange and bizarre. Part of this could be because in both everyday conversation, as well as in typical academic study of texts, the interpretive goal is to try to narrow down the range of possible meanings and to try to arrive at the speaker's or writer's intended meaning. In this context, the non-rabbinic context, if there's apparent ambiguity, this is something that one tries to overcome in one's interpretive process. By contrast, the rabbinic mode seeks to uncover and discover new possibilities of interpretive ambiguity, even where none is readily apparent, and often does so by employing deliberate creativity. So it's not that most readers of this verse would be confused had they read it. They would say, oh, does it mean they stood at the foot of the mountain, or it means they stood underneath the mountain? That wouldn't have been, in the context that it takes place, it wouldn't have been struck most people as immediately ambiguous. But the rabbinic approach, rather than seeking to overcome ambiguity, actively seeks to bring new ambiguities to light, and does not simply accept the more obvious reading that would more readily come to mind. And while the rabbinic approach could appear unusual, one dimension where a dialogue with experimental psychology and linguistics can shed light is in the distinction between the way ambiguity works on an everyday experiential level and aspects of ambiguity processing that carefully designed studies can detect and assess. Thus, on an everyday level of experience, when typical people encounter utterances in conversation or writing, most utterances appear straightforward and clear and don't cause a person to stop and say, I'm not sure exactly what that means. You know, that could happen sometimes, but usually it's not the case. In other words, in relation to most sentences, a person does not experience a feeling of ambiguity or unclarity. Yet, various studies have shown that even when a person does not consciously experience a given sentence as ambiguous, the brain may still be generating various possible meanings for the sentence, but then suppresses the meanings that appear less relevant before they reach consciousness. In other words, even sentences that consciously strike us as clear still register levels of ambiguity and multiple possible meanings. While this ambiguity only manifests consciously when the ambiguity rises above a certain threshold, it can nevertheless be detected as registering in brain processing, even when it is below the threshold of consciousness. If this is the case, then the rabbinic mode of midrashic interpretation, rather than simply appearing strange, can be understood as connected to a process that occurs all the time in everyday linguistic processing. We can view the rabbinic readers as consciously seeking to reverse the normal process of narrowing down ambiguity to arrive at a single clear understanding, and instead seeking to go back to the stage of linguistic processing in which various different interpretations exist simultaneously prior to the often non-conscious stage of selecting out the most probable understanding. Once we recognize the connection of rabbinic interpretation to this more widespread aspect of human language processing, we can then ask further questions about different varieties of human language processing. For instance, how do these processes develop over time? Do children tend to interpret sentences differently from adults in these regards? And if the rabbinic mode of interpretation seems different from the way in which adults typically approach language interpretation, could there be some ways in which children's approaches to language share some features with the rabbinic mode? If so, could we see the rabbinic mode as recovering a certain openness to language and interpretation that is present in children, but later lost in most adults? Likewise, could engagement with the rabbinic mode of interpretation shed light on ways in which neurodiverse people interpret language differently from neurotypical people? In the case of rabbinic interpretation, importantly, the rabbinic interpreters are aware of the more obvious or typical readings and are deliberately cultivating an openness to less obvious readings as a conscious practice. In addition, they treat the scriptural text in this special way, seeking out non-obvious readings, precisely because they view this text as the word of God, with the implication that interpreting God's speech may operate differently from interpreting normal human speech. And so our project will build upon previous empirical studies in psycholinguistics, and we'll conduct studies with adults and children to assess these dynamics in relation to this mode of language processing. And we can then ask further, what might be potential benefits of seeking to cultivate this mode of creatively seeking out non-obvious readings of text? If the typical mode of processing in most adults tends to filter out awareness of these additional possibilities, even though they persist on the non-conscious level, could the rabbinic practice aid a person in retaining awareness of other types of possibilities that often get filtered out? And whether this could take place on a social as well as linguistic level. So just one possible possibility on a social level, it may be that many people, on encountering a homeless person begging for money on the street, could have a socially shaped negative reaction. But could the mode of actively cultivating non-obvious possibilities in active resistance to the tendency to automatically filter them out potentially contribute to an ability to view such a person as the image of God and as a person who is equally as human and as deserving as respect as anybody else? Given typical social pressures in society, this might not be the response that would intuitively or instinctively come to mind for most people or many people. And so actively seeking to view alternative possibilities in relation to language might also carry over into this context of social interpretation as well. So we'll seek to develop ways of assessing whether habituation in some of these other modes of language engagement could lead to such effects. Thus, our project of bringing the theological mode of rabbinic scriptural interpretation into conversation with empirical studies of psycholinguistic processing can result in new ways of viewing both fields, thus leading to new paths of exploration in each. Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Right.
So I think in the interest of time, Stop sharing. Okay. So, let's see. Okay. Were you guys able to see the slides on that one?
It
Okay,
was
perfect.
fine.
Okay, great. So I think maybe what we'll do, because we are just at about our time that we were going to take a break. Maybe we'll just open it up to like a couple of questions. And if we have more questions, we can come back to them at the end. I also have a couple of questions, but maybe we'll open it up first, just in the interest of time and making sure everybody gets a chance to ask a question if they have one. So.
I have two questions for Sharon, please. My name is Shai, and I'm from an organization named Pages in London, Partnership of Jewish School. Two questions. One, did you find those slang words, the unique slang words, returning every year again and again, or it was unique for a very specific camp and very specific time? And my other question, did you find influence or impact of Israeli slang into that slang of the camps as well?
Yeah, hi. Thanks, Shai. Thank you for all of these wonderful talks. I'm really just I'm struck by the themes that go across so many of the talks. It's just so fantastic. Thank you to everyone. Yes, so in some ways these words are part of the building of the moss, of the grass at these camps, and have been around sometimes for decades. And they persevere. Nobody even knows in some places where these words came from or who started them. And they become a very insider language for a very particular camp. I mean, I didn't say this when I spoke before, but these camps are involved with an educative mission, but they are also businesses, meaning and they have a goal of filling their cabins, meaning they need to have campers in the bunks, right? And so there's always an economic aspect of education. But one of the ways that camps build their identity and create these strong alumni associations and intergenerational support are through things like language. And so the creation of particular words is one of the ways. And again, so they are they're intergenerational. So parents went to these camps and their kids go to these camps, and they can, talk the insider language to some degree. And in terms of Israeli slang, yes, for sure, because there are Israelis, there's a whole thing I didn't talk about, but actually there's a whole program of bringing over Israeli staff to work in these camps, and they come sort of loaded, metaphorically, with particular words that they want to bring to camp, the sort of the hot words or the hot songs or the hot kind of things. So yes, so kids come home saying, like Achla, Sababa, I don't know, yes, so there's definitely that too, for sure, for sure. But thank you for your questions.
Great. Maybe just one more quick question before our break. Or if not, then I'll pose.
Yeah, can I ask you a question, Nick? With your I thought it was interesting the quote you had about Elias commenting on the vowels, or the what do you say, their own letters, and to what degree did, when he's saying they don't have enough letters, that it sounds like it's a criticism in some ways, but to what degree, I guess, did he or other people know about languages like Greek that do write the vowels as the letters as part of it, and how would that have been coming in? And then the other question is, might be more this history of languages. Do we know why some languages like Greek are written with letters and others, with the ones you're discussing are written, not with vowels, but only with consonants?
The second question is harder.
Okay, yeah.
So to the first question, yeah, Elias of Alliance, I don't know. He was definitely aware of other languages. And when you say that the lack of letter sounds like a criticism, he is also criticizing his own language. Right. He's saying that all of these languages are insufficient, and he's actually echoing something that Jacob of Edessa, the other guy, said 500 or 300 years before him, that these other nations have complete or perfect languages, but his language is incomplete, it's insufficient. But that doesn't mean he wants to make it sufficient, he just wants people to be able to recite it. So Greek is the example of having a perfect alphabet, because most Syriac scholars up through the 9th or 10th century, but I'm not too sure about others, but up before that, they read Greek in monasteries, they learned Greek alongside Syriac. Jacob of Edessa loved Greek, and translated Greek grammars into Syriac, and he also knew a lot more about Hebrew than most Syriac scholars. So they're all aware of these other languages and how other systems work, to some degree, and they recognize that they have this common problem. Why do some languages have vowel letters and some don't? There's a lot of historical and scribal reasons. All of these languages, Greek, Syriac, Arabic, Hebrew, are ultimately derived from the Phoenician alphabet. Phoenician alphabet ended up in Greece at some point, and the Greeks said, well, there's all these sounds in Phoenician, basically sound kind of like Hebrew, that are in Greek, so we have these extra letters we don't need, like het. And then they took that and said, we don't need this letter, we'll use it as a vowel letter instead, and it becomes ATET or something like that. So they had extra letters already in Syriac or in Hebrew, Arabic, you needed those letters. They couldn't just become vowels. So and then it becomes sort of solidified. Once you have a text, you can't change the text. You can't just start adding letters in, especially letters that don't exist. So those are some of the reasons.
So maybe just to make sure that like we do get a break, we'll pause here, and we'll take about 25 minutes or so. And we'll resume at what's 3:15 here. But you know, we should have time at the end to come back to questions for this first group as well. So if you have further questions, hold on to those and we'll get back to them. So yeah, I think we'll leave the Zoom on, and you know, sort of feel free to come back in about 25 minutes.
They weren't probably more correct, but so that happened.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you.
And we have
Okay, so I guess I'll just wait 1 more minute.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, so between.
yeah.
Well,
So for the panel, we'll have Bene, and then Joanne will talk, and then Yomna.
Not 100.
Right.
Well, she's not here right now, but she can't really, come over.
I think they're actually So I think the way we have to do it make sure that you depth. Okay. So I think we'll get started on the second half of our speakers. So first up, so this group of speakers is going to focus a little bit more on our sort of second question, which is what can we do with what we understand about religious language learning, and sort of maybe what are the implications of some of our understandings. So to kick off our second group today, we have Professor Bene Bassetti, and she's an applied linguist. She's at the University of Modena and Reggio, Emilia, and also a senior research fellow at Birmingham, but I understand it was her last day in the UK today, so we're very lucky here. And she'll be, so next we'll have Dr. Joanne Myers, who's the Director of Jewish Education at Baeck College in London, and her talk on biblical and modern Hebrew, never the twain shall meet.
So we're just trying to find it. Okay.
I think when we share it.
Right, so yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah.
And then we share, I think it looked at the.
Yeah. Okay, so thanks very much. It's been really fascinating. I was really fascinated about all the similar issues that we've been listening to along amongst all the different sacred languages. It's the pronunciation and all that. But anyway, it's something for later for our discussions. So basically, what I'm doing, I'm going to give you a very practical example of how we can be bringing biblical and modern Hebrew together. Because those who've heard me before have learned that in a teaching and learning environment, certainly in Jewish day schools, Hebrew, biblical and modern Hebrew really are taught as different languages almost, or in very separate departments, and the teachers don't even know what the one teacher's teaching in one aspect and the other. And in fact, the whole premise of what I did in my actual action research was to bring the teachers of biblical and Jewish studies together with those of modern Hebrew. And the more they could understand what they were learning in each and what they were teaching in each department, the pupil being the common denominator would actually, it would enhance their learning language and their Hebrew understanding much better if the teacher was to make an explicit link between the Hebrew they were learning in Jewish studies and the Hebrew they were learning in modern Hebrew. So basically, people might view biblical Hebrew and modern Hebrew as two different languages. Well, absolutely not. They are just different layers of the same language. One has grown out of biblical and rabbinic Hebrew. As we know today, modern Hebrew is not just that. It's got a lot of European languages in it. It's got a lot of slang. It's got a lot of Russian, French. Certainly today, what we see in Israel is it's a different type of language altogether. But anyway, so what I wanted to start off was first to kind of give us what are the similarities and the differences and similarities between biblical and modern Hebrew. So basically, in biblical Hebrew, if anybody reads anything from the Torah, knows that it's very much verb, subject, object. V'yomer Adonai el Moshe, God, and said to V'yomer, and he said, God to, right? The person. Okay, so this is where the verb comes in first. Okay, and this is very common for all Semitic languages. There are only really two tenses in biblical Hebrew. It's the perfect and the imperfect. And the present tense is kind of expressed using the imperfect tense and sort of the participle, in other words, derived from the verb.
Okay, so, and there's variation in syntax. In other words, there's no real way of, a sentence can be formed in different ways. Okay, there's no real standardization. And we've only really got about 8,000 Hebrew words in the Bible, all right? And the vowel sounds are very much differentiated. Okay, so the A and the U and the O and the A and the E are very differentiated. When we come to modern Hebrew, we find that the sentence is very much like like most European languages, which is the subject, verb, and object. And there's a question, is modern Hebrew actually a Semitic language? If that's the case, you know, what is modern Hebrew? There's that question. And as we've been hearing a bit about today, you know, we've heard the term Israeli Hebrew. You know, when we talk about modern Hebrew, you know, are we in a post-modern era when Eliezer ben Yehuda came from Russia at the turn of the last century, and he tried to revive the Hebrew language when he came to settle in Palestine? You know, what was that? You know, that was modern Hebrew. But what is the Hebrew now that we are speaking today in Israel? You know, can we say it is purely a Semitic language? It's a question. I'm not going into that discussion, but that is definitely a question. And there are academics that actually say that it's not what is spoken in Israel today is not modern Hebrew per se. It's actually Israeli Hebrew. So that's a very interesting thing. The tense in modern Hebrew, we have the past, the present, and the future tenses. There's, you know, the syntax and the punctuation has been standardized, and it is more straightforward. Okay, so it's based really like a modern language. And we have over 100,000 words now in the modern Hebrew vocabulary. And as I said, it's not just from Biblical Hebrew, it's not just from Mishnaic Hebrew, but it's also from a lot of European languages, Yiddish, German, etc. There's a whole lot of slang language that exists in Israel as well. And also in modern Hebrew, certain sounds are treated similarly, you know, so the and the you know, is the, we don't say Hashem Shali, my name is, we say Hashem Shali. So there are certain ways in which it is kind of, you know, we don't have those distinguished sounds as they do in Biblical Hebrew. And they also, when it comes to the feminine and the masculine forms, although we know that Biblical Hebrew and modern Hebrew is a gendered language, in the modern use, things tend to defer to the masculine plural. So the feminine plural isn't really used a lot. So that's quite interesting. So what is modern Hebrew? It's an amalgamation of rabbinic, biblical, medieval Hebrew, as well as a lot of European languages. However, whilst there are these differences, and there are clearly these differences between biblical and modern Hebrew, if you have a good basis in biblical Hebrew, there's a good chance you'll be able to pick up a lot in modern Hebrew and vice versa. If you come into modern Hebrew, it's a gateway into understanding biblical Hebrew. So there is a lot of commonality. So let's see what is common. So conjugations and verb forms are the same in most cases in both biblical and modern Hebrew. Pronunciation, we've heard a lot about pronunciation today. Funny enough, for biblical Hebrew today, a lot is used with the modern pronunciation. It used to have a lot of sounds that are not present in modern Hebrew, that were present like in Arabic. But these days, a lot of people, when I read from the Torah, I tend to use a modern Hebrew pronunciation rather than the A sound, I would say the E. So they are, and it's more acceptable. And we also know that the core vocabulary of modern Hebrew comes from biblical Hebrew. And also a large majority of simple nouns and verbs, at least those that existed in the days of the Bible, are the same. And what is the most important common element between biblical and modern Hebrew are the roots. Now, Hebrew has generally a 3-consonantal root system, like other Semitic languages. Sometimes there are 2 roots, or there's sometimes 4 roots, but that is the basis of where all words and nouns and adjectives are derived. And those are the same roots that you would find in biblical and modern Hebrew. And that for me was the starting point when I started doing this project. I had to find something that was simple, easy enough for students to kind of pin their knowledge and then to explore further. So, slightly different, we're going to listen to 2 songs now. So you can just literally close your eyes. And hopefully you won't get to see the video. So it's not the video that you want to listen to see, it's the actual music. And just time to relax. It's after lunch, it's time to chill a bit. Close your eyes, and I won't play the whole song because it's too long. But the first one is an actual prayer, a Hebrew prayer that is said or sung during the evening and afternoon prayers. But it's a modern rendition of it. Okay, so there are lots of different renditions, but the words are liturgical. And the second song is a very modern Hebrew song that's become more like an anthem in Israel. And you'll certainly pick up some of the words, and hopefully you'll pick up the common word between them. I'll be testing you. Okay, so let's have a look. Let's see if this. Oops. No. Don't want to get to that. How do I get back to this? Oh, right there.
Yeah.
Okay, and I need to.
I think you have to stop the show.
Oh, right.
There. Oh, you might just have to copy paste if that's not.
It has to be in the slideshow to do it.
Okay.
I've tested this before. But...
Command and then click.
Okay, command, right.
Yeah, control.
Control. So now, can anybody come in?
Does anybody know?
Is it just copy and paste?
Oh,
look.
Oh, right, hold on.
Yeah.
Oh, do
There
it.
we go. Okay. Can people online hear it? Okay, perfect.
Okay, are you?
I can hear you talking. I cannot hear a video. All I see is the slides saying song 1 and song 2.
Okay.
Okay.
So okay, we have to stop.
Stop, share, and share with the sound.
Fine.
Gotcha.
Okay.
Also, if you put the links in the chat, we on Zoom can also just go and watch on our own. That's also a possibility.
Bottom left, when you share.
This one?
The bottom left, share sound.
Okay, well, thank God everyone knows what they're doing, because I don't.
Suddenly got so complicated.
Shalom Rav Yisrael Amcha Tasim Leolam.
Can you hear now? Okay, good.
Shalom Rav Yisrael Amcha Tasim Leolam. Shalom Rav Yisrael Amcha Tasim Leolam. Shalom Rav Yisrael Amcha Tasim Leolam. Viatavu melech Adon lechol hashalom. Viatavu melech Adon lechol hashalom. Shalom Rav Yisrael Amcha Tasim Leolam. Shalom Rav Yisrael Amcha Tasim Leolam.
Can we move on to the next one? Okay, because I don't know what I'm doing. Yeah. Right.
Oh, no. Maybe just, oops.
And the advert might come on first, so this is the advert. That's an adverse.
And then, hold on. And then we can go share sound. Yeah, is that right?
Okay. So it's all supposed to happen seamlessly and beautifully and, you know, it goes beautifully from one to the next.
Exactly.
עוד יבוא שלום עלינו, יבוא שלום עלינו ועל כולם. יבוא שלום עלינו, יבוא שלום עלינו, יבוא שלום עלינו ועל כולם. יבוא שלום עלינו, עוד יבוא שלום עלינו, יבוא שלום עלינו ועל כולם. סלאם עלינו ועל כל העולם. סלאם, סלאם. שלום עלינו, עוד יבוא שלום עלינו, יבוא שלום עלינו ועל כולם.
Okay, carries on for quite a bit. I thought we'd stop there. Okay, so thank you very much. Just share that again. And then
But now for some reason, our screen is not working.
Oh, right, I've become disconnected. Oh, we are disconnected. All right, guys, did you actually hear online? Yes, you heard, fantastic. Okay, wonderful. That was the most important thing. You haven't missed anything. We're just getting back to the.
It should work.
Okay. Okay, excellent. All right. So what was the common word that you heard between the two songs? Our Israelis.
Shalom.
Shalom, right? Which means
Peace.
peace. Hello. And well, absolutely. Okay. So the common word was shalom. All right. Now you've got to imagine that I did this with young children, and I've also done this with adults who are also kind of looking and investigating Hebrew a little bit more deeply. So we've got these three root letters. We've got the shin, the lamed and the mem, the sha, la, and mem, ma sound. And we also know that the mem at the end of the word turns to the more of the block. Okay, so just so that when you see it in a word, you'll be able to see that it actually turns into a block at the end of the word. All right. Okay, so here we've got side by side. So the premise for everything that I do with my students, adults or children, would be they're starting with the text. Now, text doesn't have to be a written text. At this point, it was the music was the start of it, and that was my text. It could be a script for a play, it could be a prayer, whatever, but I also want these children always to hear things before they actually see it written down. It was really important for me for children to get into the zone, to actually hear the language and not be given straight away something written to them. Okay, so what I've done here, just for the sake of speed, etc., I've highlighted in yellow all the three root letters, both in the rabbinic biblical and in the modern. So on the right-hand side, it's the Shalom Rav, which is that prayer. and Od Yavo Shalom Aleinu, and peace will yet still come upon us. And that was from that modern Israeli song that has become very much a peace anthem in Israel and across a lot of the world with Jewish people in summer camps, etc., and with adults. Okay, so the idea here is that the children would learn to identify these 3 root letters, and they would be able to see that actually that's the same word, the same 3 root letters in the biblical and in the modern sense. And in fact, there's great connections. Obviously, if they were to go and look at other words, we'd also find, but for this particular session, we're just concentrating on those 3 letters. Okay, so the most important thing is that we transfer the child or the student from one area, from the modern Hebrew, back into sort of the liturgical, the prayer side, and from the prayer side back into the modern, so that they can actually see the commonalities and not just look at those areas and those things that that distinguish, but actually that bring them together. So out of this, I created sort of a mind map where they would have the 3 root letters in the middle. And then you would be able to look at different words that come out of these 3 root letters. So if we're starting from that side, from the top right-hand side, we've got the word shalom. Okay, again, I've highlighted those 3 root letters. And we know that shalom means peace. It means hello in modern Hebrew, and goodbye. And it also comes from tza'atchem b'shalom and uvuachem b'shalom, going out in peace and coming in with peace. So that's, when somebody does it, hi and bye, basically. All right, in modern Hebrew, coming further down, we have ma shalomcha. How are you? But actually, what is your peace? How is your peace? How are things with you? All right. Ma shlomech, it's a gendered language, and ma shlomchem. How are you? All right. From that, we also get Shabbat Shalom, a peaceful Shabbat. Okay. And we've got another saying, Shlom Bait, which is peace in the home. All right. Let's not, create too many ruckuses when grandma comes and I know she's got all, we want Shlom Bait, we want peace in the home. Let's have a good Shabbat. Okay. So then we're coming to the second line. Again, looking at these 3 root letters, and let's try and discover what actually, these 3 root letters, what does that actually mean? Does it actually mean peace, hello? What does it actually mean? So the word mushlam actually means perfect. Okay, in the modern Hebrew. Shalem means it's whole, it's complete, it's perfect. Shlemut is perfection, wholeness. Lahashlim is to complete, to make peace with, to reconcile with. And hashlama is completion or fulfillment. So just from those words, we suddenly get an understanding that those 3 root letters give us so much more than just hello, goodbye, and peace, right? There's something to do with completion. It's something to do with reconciliation. It's something to do with this perfection and wholeness. And even in a modern day world where our teachers go on Hishtalmut, when they go on continual professional development, CPD, that word, Hishtalmut, it's reflexive, right? Because we are fixing ourselves up, we're completing ourselves, right? It's very interesting how we are, and we never really stop completing ourselves. But it's like when we pray in Hebrew, lehitpalel, it's also very reflexive. We're praying with ourselves, by ourselves, for ourselves. It's the same thing here. It's a reflexive verb. And lehishtalem is to engage in CPD, to go on all different training courses. And that could be for anything, for teachers, for nurses, for doctors, dentists, police. You go on hishtalmut or hishtalmuyot, different CPD encounters. And then if we go back into sort of the biblical, or the Torah side, Melech Shlomo. Now you can see within his name, Solomon, we've got those 3 root letters. Can anybody kind of think why Solomon might have those 3 letters of something to do with peace or completion? Why would King Solomon, Melech Shlomo, have the word peace in his name?
Because he was a bringer of peace.
He was a bringer of peace. absolutely. He was Oseh Shalom, he was the peacemaker, right? And in fact, it was the period of the most peace in the land of Israel. When he was reigning as king, it was a very peaceful reign. So the question is he called Shlomo because he reigned peacefully, or you know what I mean? So what is the egg or what came first? That he lived up to his name, or his name was named after him, So it's an interesting one. I haven't yet discovered that answer yet. And there's another Hebrew name for a girl, Shulamit. I don't know if you've heard of the word Shulamit, but it's also from the word something to do with peace or completion in her name. So just to give you an idea that a lot of Hebrew names today, modern Hebrew names, come from those words. Mm. And then another three letters, and other words that we've got, lishalem is to pay. Now, why those three letters? What is the connection paying for something and this whole thing of shalem? Can anybody think?
To give willingly.
To give?
Willingly, like without being forced with peace.
Okay, kind of, but not really. If you
but
think
in Arabic, we have also the sleen is to give, for example, to submit an application, to submit something.
Oh, okay.
From salam.
Is it sort of like a transaction? Is it like a transaction? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. But when you pay for something, you're completing something, a transaction, isn't it? When you pay for something, you're completing something that maybe you owe, right? So lishalem is this a form of completing something, and payment is tashlum. It's a payment of that, or tashlumim, or payments, installments in modern Hebrew. And then we also, from that, we've got the word for shilumim, which is war reparations, shilumim. So it's almost reconciliation. There's something about that word, shalom, that is making complete, is making reconciliation. It is making peace with, right? So all those kind of transactions has this kind of thing of creating a peaceful resolution. And then we've got Jerusalem, Yerushalayim. Now already you can see that Shin Lamed Mem there, it has different meanings. It could be seen as the city of peace, or it is complete, all, from the word yareh, which is all, yeah? It's complete all. When you look down on Jerusalem, you're in complete awe. So there are two different meanings about Jerusalem, but it certainly has those two kind of meanings together. I think I'm coming, just doing my last one. So what I wanted to just say, that this is a very quick kind of framework that I developed for children to be able to, when they were sitting in maybe in an assembly and reading from their prayer book, and they would come across the word shalom, and they've learned what shalom is in modern context, and then they've seen it in the biblical context. Suddenly, and they get to the essence of the core of the word, of those three letters, suddenly the word actually becomes more alive. Yeah. And becomes more significant and more meaningful to them, rather than just seeing them in an isolated kind of way. So bringing them together and investigating the words that come out from that was really, really helpful. So, as I said in the beginning, biblical and modern Hebrew are different, as we've seen, but actually they're the layers of the same language. Knowledge of one can help the other. And I found very much so that the consonantal root system is one vehicle, which can link the two together in a very easy, simple way, and actually with great reward for the students and adults and children alike. And what it does, and that was the most important thing, it didn't leave an understanding of Hebrew just on the very superficial level of peace, hello, goodbye. But actually, within that word, or within those three root letters, there's so much more to those three words, three letters, that it actually you get to understand so much more about the Hebrew from the Bible, why certain things use those three root letters. And what certainly it showed me was that, the religious and the secular don't have to be separated. They can work very much side by side. And in fact, one can inform the other and they can live together in harmony. And that sort of was what I created as a framework for bringing the two together. Show. So I just end the show here.
Yeah.
Right, thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Julianne.
Pleasure.
Thank you. Interesting. Oops. Okay. And then next, there we go. Next, we'll hear from Yomna Helmy, a teacher, a teaching and outreach associate here at Cambridge in the Center of Islamic Studies. And she'll be talking to us about re-envisioning the role of religious heritage learners of Arabic.
Sorry, before we start, we want to apologize. I have to release the child when they're in London. So we're going to ignore the right.
Sorry.
Sure.
But we will get the recording.
Yeah, so this will be online, we'll share the recording.
Sure. I apologize.
It's up to you. Yeah, you can sit there, the owl should pick it up, okay? It's up to you. Thank you both for coming.
Take my phone to a sec, but hi. So I'm a Arabic teacher at the Center of Islamic Studies here at Faculty of Middle Eastern Studies here at Cambridge University. And I perhaps will take the opposite side of the image. My research is more associated with Juan and very closer to this. What I would like to share with you is learning Arabic in a secular context instead of a religious context, and particularly Arabic heritage learners in university classrooms. And my question here is about the role of religious affiliation in heritage language status for Arabic learners. And I mean here Muslim learners who are connected to the language for spiritual or religious purpose, but are not of any Arabic ethnicity. And my question is, are they to be considered with heritage learners of the language, or should they be considered or placed with the second language learners? Because just to give you a context, I teach postgraduate students, PhD, master, sometimes postdoctoral fellows who need Arabic language to have access to some resource. And so oftentimes we come to this question, where should we place those students who do not have ancestral ties to Arabic region, but they have a religious and spiritual connection or purpose for learning this language. Now, regarding the term heritage language learners in linguistics, we refer to, or usually refer to heritage language learners as students who enroll in Arabic language courses in our context in universities and colleges, and they are of Arab descent, and they perhaps have parents or have families who immigrated from the Arab world, and they also speak or native speakers of one of the colloquial spoken varieties of Arabic. However, we know that non-Muslim speakers, non-Arab Muslims who come to learn Arabic do not necessarily have familiar or ancestral ties to spoken varieties of Arabic, and yet Arabic, and especially classical Arabic or Quranic Arabic, is a language of some personal relevance to many of them. So still, in the universities, in most contexts, in most secular contexts, especially universities, non-Arab Muslim learners are usually oftentimes placed with second language learners and not included usually with heritage learners of the language within their classrooms. And this is perhaps because you have pointed to this, because research in Arabic language learning tend to place heritage learners relative to a better known entity, i.e. native speakers of Arabic versus non-native speakers of Arabic. And also, we can see that religion is underestimated as an influential factor in identity construction, as opposed to other factors or categories such as race, ethnicity, and even gender
but still religion is not that much considered when we place or when we decide where to place certain students within the program or the courses. And this, of course, has much to do with the influences of secularization and the prediction that God, or the declaration that God is there, perhaps has not made religion disappear completely, but it pushed it somehow to private sphere. And it contributed to this perhaps anxiety or disinterest or unease and fear of discussing and dealing with religions in education, secular education in general, and of course the language classroom are not properly an exception. However, drawing on my experience as a language teacher, Arabic teacher in secular contexts, I think we can benefit from the inquiry beyond this relativity paradigm, attending instead to the social, to the individual, to the environmental factor that shape or are shaped by the Arabic varieties, including modern standard Arabic, including classical Arabic and Quranic Arabic. So for Muslims, as you all mentioned, the Arabic language and Islam are very, very connected. And Prophet Muhammad's revelation was in Arabic. Quran itself addresses languages favoring Arabic as a means of communicating the word of God. So Muslims of any first language are hugely encouraged to study Arabic grammar because the language of the Quran is said to be devoid of any crookedness or any mistakes. And this is an ideological point of departure that the issue of surrounding Arabic diglossia and it actually strengthens the position that I take, where I view non-Arab Muslim learners of Arabic as heritage learners, regardless of their first language and regardless of their ancestral ties to Arabic-speaking regions. Now, in my classrooms, I teach both. I teach native Arabic speakers, heritage learners, I teach second language learners and many of non-Arab Muslim learners. And I can say that there are a lot of linguistic differences, affective differences, academic differences between second language learner and non-Arab Muslim learners who learn Arabic. They are simply different. The path of acquisition, as you mentioned, is completely different by second language learner and non-Arab Muslim learners. So modern standard Arabic is the target language in my classrooms. It's not classical Arabic at all. It's not Quranic Arabic. That's the majority of the class content, the text, the activities are non-religious, and religious knowledge do not really figure into the classroom or the language objective. And yet it's not uncommon that many non-Arab Muslim students in my classes draw upon their religious identity throughout the lessons. For many of them, Muslim identity is a resource not only to reconstruct or perhaps construct desired academic and social identity, but also to strengthen their academic performance, particularly performance in reading and speaking. Several learners, a lot of time, they will constantly demonstrate a distinctive style of reading or speaking in Arabic, which is absolutely or clearly differ markedly from non-Muslim learners or second language learners. And these oral practices that we oftentimes see in the classrooms from non-Arab Muslims are reflexive of how they read or the readers attend to the tajweed, the rules of tajweed when they read Quran. Even though we know that the rules of tajweed is only applied for Quran, it's melodic, it's like a song. We don't speak modern standard Arabic with the rules of tajweed, or we don't even speak classical Arabic with the rules of tajweed. However, it stands to reason that this religious literacy practice that are designed to keep the tongue and the breath of erring would perhaps benefit and support the literacy practice in secular domain as well, and not just religious students. So many of students also, oftentimes they recall Quranic verses they already memorized, dua or prayer they already memorized, phrases, common phrases they learned or they oftentimes hear from preacher at Jum'ah, khutbah or ceremony, and they bring that to the class as a resource to prove their, for example, I have once, that's in a very, very beginning level. So that's class number 2 or session 2, session 3 at the very beginning, and we were discussing the word kul, which means sometimes every and sometimes all. But I gave them the vocabulary, just the word by itself. And one of the students say it means every, so it was in a sentence. Other ones said it could mean every and it could mean all. I told him, how do you know? And he said, because he knows Quran, and he said, all food was allowed to Bene Israel. That's all. And every soul will taste death. That's every. And that was just, and I have lots of examples like this, how they draw upon their resources, their Quranic Arabic. And often I can figure out that this student has studied Quranic Arabic before or not, or is he Muslim perhaps or not, just by the way the pronunciation. I had one of my students who was from Latvia, and I had no idea that he's a Muslim. And once he started to speak, I realized the difference. So the pronunciation, the very, very beautiful and strong pronunciations. I asked him, have you studied Quran before with someone or madrasa? And he said, yes, I just converted 5 years ago and studied with a Malaysian Sheikh or scholar in Malaysia. And so that's fascinating to see this from very beginning level. So non-Muslim learners are typically a lot more fluent orally in their production and comprehension than second language learner. They tend also to have, as I mentioned, more native-like phonological system, better pronunciation system than second language learners. They tend to have larger vocabulary, similar to heritage learner, and sometimes even better than heritage learner themselves, because the vocabulary they use is classic Arabic, which is closer to modern standard Arabic, which is the academic, the formal language, or the higher register of Arabic, if I can say, and not a dialect or a colloquial variety of Arabic. Now, looking at the sum of the effective consideration, emotional and social consideration, these folks usually, they have a religious connection to Arabic, and they learn the higher register of the language, the classic Arabic, which is closer to modern standard Arabic, the prestigious one, the Quranic Arabic. And yet many of them have been ridiculed for the variety of language they use, for using classical Arabic as a means of communication by us teachers. And I'm very unfortunate to say that. Yes, by the new academic trend in higher education, especially here in the Western university in America, to promote that the way the Arabic language as just as a means for communication, and that's it. So to learn Arabic, a Muslim, non-Arab Muslim students will say, كيف حالك ما أخبارك, and they will say, will make fun of him. They will tell him, people will make fun of you if you speak like this, or they speak like this. If you go to Egypt, the taxi driver will laugh at you because nobody speaks like this. The hotel receptionists will not understand or comprehend that, which is not true, of course, because people listen to Al Jazeera, people listen to BBC Arabic, and those are modern standard Arabic. So we reduce the language to colloquial language, and in order to be fluent in Arabic, you have to speak one of the variety, choose Egyptian or Levantine or Iraqi or the Gulf. And other than that, we are not learning that. So second language student will say, كيفك شلونك شو أخبارك, and they will be, oh, wow, you are learning, that's wonderful. And non-Arab Muslim will say something in very classical way, and you will have all sorts of reactions. And this, of course, so I don't have to tell you about all kind of linguistic bullying and kind of linguistic violence that happen nowadays for those who choose to speak this variety, and they were told that it is not a spoken language, it's just for books and text, and we don't use it in speaking. So all of this actually come together to create sort of linguistic self-esteem at the end to those students who are proud of that they know something and they want to use it in communication. However, they are, as I mentioned, they have many ways in which these learners draw upon their religious faith and in my language classroom to support their social and academic identities. And I have to note that these preferred academic identities that is supported by their religious identities do not necessarily yield in better test score proficiency. I don't have still evidence on this, which I'm working on. But still, I don't think it will lead to any better score in their test in their proficiency test. But I think they do offer points of access to the learner themselves for future engagement in the content and the activities in the class. And I really support the idea of engaging the religious with the secular to benefit, and this total separation between the secular and the religion is, I think it's the time that we can engage with this and we can benefit from this. So I support expanding the definition of heritage language learner to include religious ties to the language, even in the absence of ethnic or ancestral ties to the language. Just as the traditional conception of heritage language learner conceive of home language and ancestral tie as cultural and linguistic resources in learner repertoire, so do the religious resources contribute to the Muslim learner linguistic repertoire. This is my reflection here. And this is not to suggest, of course, that secular institutions should now go or adopt or aim for more Islam-focused curriculum, rather than by examining the way the students benefit from accessing all elements of their linguistic and cultural repertoires. The benefit of an ideologically inclusive classroom must not be ignored at all. And educators should be free to resist this total separation, as I mentioned, between Arabic and religion. Even mixed classroom in public institution, I do advocate not only allowing students or heritage language learners to draw upon their religious, cultural resources, but also encourage them to do so. And because the ideological space of this sort of an expanded repertoire already exists within the language itself. We cannot take the Islam or the Islamic background from Arabic at all. And this perhaps will result in reducing and eliminating students feeling stigmatized or from using their religious resources and classical Arabic as a variety for communication or a way for communication in their learning. And perhaps will make them, and the aim is to make them more empowered and welcome and benefit more from the religious identity or religious resources that they already acquired when in certain time during their study. So yeah, that's everything I wanted to share with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Yomna. And finally, we have Adel Mozammel, the director of the Darul Ihsan School in London. And he'll be discussing the difference between Quranic Arabic and other sacred languages, common problems for teachers in teaching Arabic, and the benefits of sharing best practice in teaching sacred languages. So I'll just grab your, did you send me your? I don't see it here.
They might have the junk, will come from different platforms in mind.
Oh, okay.
Go to junk. Yeah. They're from admin at Clever IQ.
Oh, let me see.
Clever IQ.
No.
No, because
Right, that's your email address there, right?
Yeah, should be. Oh, it's too big. That's why I didn't go through. So maybe what we can do is, can you airdrop it to me?
Yeah.
Okay. So airdrop. Turn on Bluetooth. Okay. Okay. You have airdrop on there?
And that's like actually mentioned in such.
But if it's one representative, which I'm happy without.
Okay.
Resources 28 years ago. And
Yeah.
but that's
No?
No, nothing.
Oh, I will leave.
Okay, sorry.
No, it's fine.
Yeah, I think, yeah, because I think if I unplug this, then we'll.
Yeah.
close the Zoom.
Hello. So it's been a long day. Thank you, Anastasia, Leslie, and the guys that are internationally available. Hello to everyone. So I'll give you a quick background of who I am. My name is Adel, and so I'm the director of Darul Ihsan in London. And I did my PGCE in religious education some 15 years ago. And then I worked inside secondary schools teaching Ori for a long time. And then after about maybe 15 years, I got out of secondary school teaching, and then we opened a tuition center, and that did really well. And then we opened loads of them. And that was like great as a business. Then we opened Darul Ihsan, which is an Islamic school. It is like a private Islamic school. And what we have with Darul Ihsan, it's very different to a secular teaching, just English, math, making kids do well, where the language learning comes into place, Quranic ideals come into place. And what we have is we do these holiday camps. And when we hear about Sharon talking about the camps they do, so we do the same thing, right? And I'm taking away from this experience today what Arabic words I'm going to include into our practice. But what we found is that our parents are mainly second generational Muslim professionals. And they have a completely different expectation for what their children will learn when it comes to their religion to what maybe the first generation migrants did when they came to this country. So we found that the migrants that came, or the Muslims that came to the UK in the 60s and 70s, they had this kind of culture and idea of keeping everything together. Don't let the kids integrate too much, or else they will go out and we will lose them. And it was like keeping the community safe. And their concerns were primarily about earning, making a living, maybe sometimes sending money back home. Now, the second generation are very different. They grew up here, and when they went to school, or when they learned Islam in this country, what they learned was primarily from the mosque teacher, the madrasas, and they learned Arabic, and they learned Quranic Arabic primarily. And it was through a rote learning method that they learned. They learned every evening, and they went to the mosque after school from 5 to 7 most times, and it was just taking in, but not really understanding. Now, the parents that we have today, they come to us and they say, we don't want that. We don't want our kids to just sit there reciting. So when we speak with them, they say, look, we really want them to engage with it. We want them to understand it. And there's also this kind of fear that because most of our customers are mothers. Mainly the educating is being done. It's the moms that are in charge of it. It's maybe for every 10 moms, we have one dad. So they do want to have a certain amount of control over what their child is learning. So when they go to the mosque environment is primarily male dominated. So
and there is a veil between men and women. So oftentimes a lot of moms feel like, well, we're not being able to communicate properly and find out how much our children are learning. So they feel left out. So how do we solve this problem? And this is where online Quran has become really, really good. Now, another problem that we found with a lot of our customers in South London is that they may be Pakistani or Bangladeshi or Somali. However, they want their children to be pronouncing Arabic like the Arabs. The one mom said to me that if my son is reciting and there's a group of Arabs behind him, I don't want the Arabs to know that he's from this place. I want him to think he's Arab. Why? Because there is a beauty in the Arabic language in the way it's pronounced, and it should be perfect. There is this perfection in how it should be done. And if you're not reciting perfectly, then there is a big question of why not. If you have all these resources to be reciting correctly, then there is no excuse. And we still have students coming to us who recite with an accent that's coming from Indo-Pak. And what happens is that you really see the difference. Like from the children that are pronouncing correctly to the children that are not, even if you're a non-Arab, it hits your ear that this isn't right, something's not right. And I've had some parents say that when they go through, like we're in the month of Ramadan at the moment, and there is these prayers in the evening that they do for 20 units. And we have Arab worshippers who say, you know, I can't stand behind this imam because the way he pronounces really affects me. So there is a hierarchy and there is a perfection, and it has to be a certain way. So our teachers now for Quran come from Saudi Arabia, and they're female teachers. And what we have is a program where instead of going to the mosque for 2 hours, where this can be actually done in half an hour, like with one teacher. And we found that female teachers actually are, dare I say it, superior, because they're able to also talk to the mums as well. And what's happening now is that the mothers that may be, professionals, and they're coming home and they're sitting with their children for half an hour, but then they're also developing their own recitation. And they're now engaging with their children, and now there's this connection being formed between the mom and the child through Quran, that this is an activity that they're doing together. Because a lot of the time, moms are so busy with everything else they have to do, along with working, housework, and getting everything done. Because usually by the end of the evening, you have to get them washed, you have to get ready, you have to do lunches for the next day, you're over. It's like there's only so much, but this becomes like an activity that they're actually doing with their children, where in the future, the children can be like, oh, I learned the most important holy book from my mom. And that becomes a very powerful experience. And then it's also for us as a center, is that now you're including this not only as a language to be taught for the children, but also for adults who may not have had this experience. Because if you went to a mosque for 2 hours in a night just reciting the same word, you may have learnt it, but you haven't really absorbed it. You haven't got any of the intellectual properties that this language offers. So one of the first things we do is that, along with doing the basics, we get them very quickly to understand the meaning of the words. And we found that these children, when they've understood the meaning of the words, they love it so much more. Because if you are telling them about Solomon and you're teaching about the ants, and from Amazon you can buy like ant maps and so on, and that's it. For them, they've absorbed the idea of who is Prophet Solomon, what happened with the ants, they've absorbed it. If you're going to teach them about Jonah and the whale, there's so much imagery that can be used to make it all come to life. So for us, it is really important in these camps and in these schools with the language that it becomes for us, ideally, is that it's a way of life for these children, that this is their belief, and it shouldn't be taught to them in such a way that they hate it. It should be taught in a way of love so that they grow up loving it and they grow up with, and I think even if it's if you're teaching Hebrew in a Jewish school, if anything that is taught through a way of love works. Whilst I was teaching in schools for 10, 15 years, I found that there were so many teachers that children, you would see, they would come out of that classroom and the light had been sucked out of their faces. They hated it because the teacher brought a certain energy. And that's so important when, if a teacher does not come in with that mindset and clearing the slate of whatever emotional fractions happen with that student previously, you have to come in with this clean attitude so that the children can take something away from your classroom. And I think now, after running Darul, Ihsan and PGRI for our teachers, it's also about training them to be looking at what is it you're doing this for, and what at the end of each lesson the children should leave feeling more energized than drained. Then leaving your classroom feeling drained, it's because all you've done is hit one aspect of them. And we think that along with knowledge, there's also heart and there's also soul. And the teacher has to be able to hit all of these different elements so that the child comes away feeling nourished. And that requires for the teachers to also nourish themselves and reflect on themselves, because if you're carrying, it's about us as teachers being able to look inside ourselves and be sure that whatever is affecting us in our lives, that we've come to a space that we're clear. And if we're not clear, then our message is not going to go to anybody else. It's just going to come across like people will nod along and children will pretend they've understood, but they haven't really absorbed it. It hasn't impacted them. To make an impact, we have to make that impact in our lives first, because otherwise they're not going to hear it. And their kids, they've got roadblocks and all kinds of things on YouTube and gadgets to keep them more entertained than Arabic language and Quran. So that's all I have to say for today. So thank you very much. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Adel. So that actually perfect timing sort of brings us right to the end of our day. But maybe we can just take one or two questions. It has, it's been a sort of long afternoon, so I don't want to like keep everybody super late. But yeah, I think maybe one or two questions.
So one thing that when you're talking about Solomon and that the peace is embedded in his name, I was wondering, and I don't know, there's the Ring of Solomon. Is there such a thing as the Ring of Solomon? That I've heard that he was known, like there was a power that Solomon had, and people used to talk about the Ring of Solomon. It's like it's in loads of texts about the Ring of Solomon.
The seal of Solomon.
Is it the seal? Was the seal a ring?
The seal of Solomon.
Right. Okay. Is it
Same concept? Yeah.
right? Okay.
Yeah.
So here's my question. Thank you. Here's my question. Is that anyway related to his name? Is there like, because I don't know about if it's the ring or the seal, but is it that, is the idea for a ring, because the idea for a ring is that it's endless, right? Is that linked to peace somehow? I don't know.
I don't know.
No,
I don't know. I think that's the whole concept of his name, and if he got his name from the way he governed and the way he ruled. So there's this whole thing, and that seal of Solomon. I think there's different ways of interpreting, but that's lovely. I think it's lovely. I think that's the whole thing. It brings up so many questions for children to talk about, and I think that's the beautiful thing about it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, one thing that fascinates me the most in general, but also from this event today is the question for Muslim families that are living outside of Muslim majority countries, right, and are dealing with raising children in an environment where it feels much more challenging to raise good Muslims. That some communities shift towards this, what Liddicoat calls the comprehensibility orientation, that they want the children to learn to understand Arabic and be able to actually understand propositional content of sacred texts. But not all communities do that, right? So Tanti's community, the Indonesian Muslims in the US, that's not been the shift. But what you described, Adel, that has been very strongly the shift over a couple of generations. And I find that variation and change really, really interesting across faith communities. But of course, I'm particularly interested in with Muslim communities. And I wonder if people want to comment that with any of the communities we've talked about. Why make the shift? Why not make the shift? What seem to be factors involved?
I would like to reply to Leslie's comment. Within the families and Indonesian families, the Indonesian community, inside the family, they focus more on perfecting recitation, but then they also have send their children to the Islamic schools, Islamic weekend schools, and also they also have a Midwest gathering in the US, and also annual gathering where children learn about the meanings of the Quran. So the parents send their children to the schools to understand the meaning of the Quran, but then inside the household they focus on perfecting the recitation. So that's what sometimes also parents tell the stories of the prophets and tell them that this story links to that chapter of the Quran. So it's like that. Actually, but because our paper was not focused on that, focused on recitation, so we just mentioned about recitation. That's what I found in our study. Thank you.
Thank you, Tanti.
Yes, I would like to add something to this point. So in my research, both with Quranic Arabic and with Sanskrit, I had the impression that there were two factors here in this search for meaning, and also the objection to rote learning, which is traditional in all of these the traditions of language learning and traditions. Sorry, language learning and teaching traditions have been looking at. And I think the two factors are proficiency in the language. So it's people who have lower levels of proficiency in Sanskrit or Quranic Arabic seem to really put a lot of emphasis on the pronunciation, and then beyond that they start thinking about the meaning. So I think one issue is the level of proficiency of these parents. And then I also found well, because I was working with highly educated adults, they were talking about rejecting traditional teaching for their children, and they were using learning Quranic Arabic as empowerment for themselves, also to go beyond what the religious leaders were telling them. But this is related to being extremely highly educated, which is why we then replicated the study in a local mosque to see what the local community would say without having all these masters and PhDs that we've been interviewing up to that point.
Can I comment on that as someone who doesn't have a master's and a PhD, but has had that very lived experience of actually embracing Islam and then having to bring up Muslim children as a white Western woman in an environment of Australia where the Muslim community was very small and very fragmented. So that's actually what we were forced to do. We were forced to teach our children rote learning because there wasn't particularly anybody that you could go to that was prepared. Often it was the imam whose English was very small, very limited, and his main aim was to get those children reciting. and not about the meaning. Having come from a Western society, I went, well, my children have to have meaning. So I set about teaching them the meanings, not from the Arabic language, but from the English translation. And so I would say to them, what we are reciting here, and I myself, so when you say Arabic as not a heritage, that's my experience. And so the roteness doesn't actually give me the ability to converse with anybody. Having said that, my children, because they've learnt the meaning from the surahs or the chapters that we recite, when we went to Mecca, there was for them an understanding of the words. And in their vernacular, their Arabic words are part of their everyday vernacular, whereas it's very little of mine, unless I'm conversing with a Muslim, you know, with the appropriate language. And so, yes, so I guess that also for the Indonesian perspective is that your own cultural group, how many of you in your own cultural group actually give you the ability to then go, well, we're going to concentrate on this. When you're part of very different cultural groups, then the consensus is the main thing is to get the thing learned. And you can worry about the meaning later. So
yeah, I think just speaking about not about what I shared today, but what I've shared in other of our workshops, in my work with the liberal community in Luxembourg, the liberal Jewish community, there's also a real focus on this kind of decoding, you know, not learning to read for comprehension. But what was interesting was for a lot of parents, this was, and for the teachers, this was a really like deliberate choice in a way. Because there was this feeling that, well, if you can understand these texts, and all these texts are talking about things that maybe we're not so sure how we feel about, like angels or stories we're not sure if we believe in, or even God, then that creates like another layer of like discussions and, you know, we might have to have, or problems we might have, or debates we have to have. So better that we just learn to decode, and that in itself is meaningful. We can still do the rituals and practice together. And so that was really interesting, that like, it was almost the opposite of what you would expect in a kind of like liberal context, where you see a lot more like emphasis on translation and understanding. Yeah, it was like a choice to focus on decoding over comprehension. So that was really interesting. In a way, like reading just for decoding helps them maintain the sense of self as like very progressive and modern somehow. Yeah, even though that's like the opposite of our sort of like modern liberal ideas about how literacy works. Yeah.
Can I share my thoughts about the pronunciation and also heritage, religious heritage language? Because I remember you mentioned that your interviewees, they told you how much joy they found in pursuing the perfection of pronunciation, pronouncing Quranic Arabic. But I was thinking probably they are not willing to tell you how political or how controversial it is, which is through the way they pronounce when they in a religious space. So I think the political aspects of pronunciation should be included. And also from the observers or researchers' perspective, pronunciation is also performative. So probably it would be helpful if we could know something about background about those learners. For example, in particular, their theological or sectarian orientation.
Yes.
For example, is it somehow maybe related to the rise of Salafization? Not the Egyptian Salafization, the Saudi Wahhabi Salafization, so that some families or some young people, they hold a different view of whether or in what way they should recite Quranic Arabic. Because as far as I know, some of the Muslim families, not necessarily from the Arab countries or the Muslim majority, probably at the periphery of the Islamic Ummah. I mean, their tradition doesn't really pay attention to the way or the pronunciation, whether it's accurate or not, because this is something ideological. And the other thing I'm thinking about the heritage language, religious heritage, because I'm not sure. I mean, my thoughts are not mature, but I'm not sure whether the term religious heritage learner, this term, give justice to those learners who learn that language or who learn something that we talk about as Hebrew, for example, or as Arabic. Because I mentioned in the second presentation, professor from New Jersey, she mentioned the language that those students they learned in summer camp is not Hebrew. Yes, it is not Hebrew. But I'm thinking it is a kind of language, or it's not like a Creole language that is produced, generated by, or driven by a heritage language that we assume as Hebrew. But I think heritage language, I mean, as a concept, it is there and we all agree with it. But what is exactly that? Well, I think that is not equal in any language. It's not equal to Sanskrit or Arabic or Hebrew. Yeah, so because heritage language learner, it sounds to me like those people, they learn that heritage language, but actually that heritage language is not a given. And it is those people, they learn this grammar or the syntax or the approach, different kind of textbooks based on their ideology or the support from, or the suggestion from their family. And then finally, it seems to me that all these people, I mean, as the learner of the second language, they're in a ghetto. Because their goal actually is not to pursue, well, I'm sure, but probably it's their dream or ambition, but I mean, finally, they wouldn't be bilingual, and that is only ambition. And then this person, I think, produces the inequality. Yeah, and that's why I'm very curious about the American Hebrew learners in summer camp. I mean, those Hebrew infusion, those, you know, what they learned, what they created, how they use it outside school and outside their household, outside private setting of household. Because I think in public, when they try to integrate themselves to the majority of society, it is a chance for them to gain their equality. Yeah, so I think, yeah, and the other is about decoding and the translation, sorry, not translation, to explain the three roots. I mean, in terms of the way to teach this language to different, you know, to people of different ages, probably, I mean, for the adults as learners, or from the adults' perspective as parents, they're looking for something more economic. Yeah, economic, more time saving. Yeah, and then life saving, and then that means probably the most convenient or seemingly convenient way is to do translation. So that's probably why, in your case, your student, you know, he's like, oh, Kunlu means ever, because that is translation of the Arabic sentence, right? So what actually in his mind or her mind is the word by word translation. It's not something, it's not a process of analyzing or experiencing how that language, either Arabic or Hebrew actually is three-dimensional. Because that's the cultural and historical treasure in that language. To learn that is really a luxury. Yeah, it's like soft power. And then quite a luxury.
No, I agree with you, because, you know, for most Jewish adults, they want to be able to maybe at least decode some Hebrew when they're going to, you know, to the synagogue, and they can, you know, and then they can look at the English translation to help them. So what you're saying is correct. What I'm doing mainly is to give people who want more of a richer understanding of the language, which you could see as a luxury.
They're lucky to have that class, really.
You know, but I think it's necessary, because certainly for children, they're growing up with an understanding of Hebrew that is compartmentalized, that doesn't mix, that doesn't make sense to them. and they're only seeing it in one context. So that was really the idea, was to really break down those barriers and get them to see Hebrew as permeating everything that as part of their Jewish lives, and that the meaning is so much more than just one word that they know the meaning of, and they think that's what it means, right? It's so it could be seen as a luxury, or I see it for children, it's a necessity, funny enough. I think, you know, our children growing up in this country with Hebrew, they're not getting there, they're learning it in a way that does a disservice to their language and to their literacy.
And also probably because of their such, well, I still prefer to say a luxury experience of getting themselves immersed in the historical and the cultural depths of this. I mean, because
100%, yes.
Yeah, I mean, because of this rich experience, well, okay, this rich experience finally reduced to the motivation when they grow up. So that's probably some of them choose to, for example, learn this language in a kind of professional way or in a professional language center. And then on that track, the methodology will be more economic, right?
Perhaps. Yeah. No,
But
I
I mean,
understand.
yeah, so.
Yeah, it's interesting what you know, the different things you pick, the political aspects of the language that you're bringing up. Very interesting.
Yes, I mean, the political aspect, you asked me, so I'm going to take that one. Regarding the political aspect and also the sectarian orientation, as you called it, we didn't want to ask these things. We wanted to stick to the language. However, all these things emerged from interviews, and the choice of, so there was a feeling among some participants that there was an oh my gosh, I can't pronounce today, Arabization process going on, and a strong reaction against Saudi Arabian Arabic. So, and it came from the periphery. So people who were learning Quranic Arabic in places like Cyprus, Turkey. So that was definitely an issue, and I did not want to ask about their exact beliefs. So unless they mentioned it, I didn't want to. But it is a limitation, clearly.
Yeah.
Can I comment on that really bit? Because so our Quran teachers from Sari, and the reason, and what we found, and this is more as a business, is that our parents, although they are majority from Pakistan, Bangladesh, Somalia, they don't want their children to sound Pakistani, Bangladeshi, Somali. Now, this could be because of Salafization and all of that. It could be, but they want their children to sound like Arabs. Now, I've heard Turkish recitation is beautiful. I've heard recitation from Bangladesh, from Pakistan is beautiful, it's melodious, and in fact, the pronunciation is not off. It's the tajweed and all of those things are there, but the melody is perhaps different. However, parents across the board, they say because I don't know if this is because the most popular reciters are from the Haram in Mecca, as in not the Egyptians, but the most common that's played out in bookshops and so on is Sudais and Shuraim, and they are the most prominent. So maybe for those who don't know, they will assume, well, this is the right one, and it could be that.
Just a comment on that. You're talking about your parents. My sons actually prefer the recitation. There's nothing Salafist about my children. Truly, they're really quite radical. But they prefer what you would call the traditional Arabic recitations. They find the melody or the poetry of the Quran speaks to them when people from particularly Mecca, the Grand Mosque, are reciting. That speaks to them more so than, they're still currently living in South Africa, than the Imam of the South African mosque, who has a very South African lilt to his recitations. They don't, they go, they enjoy it, they engage, but what really touches them is the recitations from Mecca. My eldest son has tapes and CD, you know, whatever podcasts of the people from Mecca. So I think there's something perhaps about the melody for them, more so than the actual what's being said or recited, but for them, for their ears, the melody is something very important to them.
Sure. I think anyway, it's just past 5, so we're already 15 or 20 minutes over time. But thank you all so much for joining us and for speaking and for getting this really interesting discussion going. And I hope we can continue it somehow. Yeah, thank you. And the recording will be online as well. Yeah, if you'd like to check it out or share it anywhere. So
Thank you, Anastasia.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
yeah, thank you so much, Iona, for organizing everything and putting the
Indeed. Thank you, Iona.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Leslie. Thank you, Tanti.
It's discussion point. No, that.
Yeah. Yes.